Who needs the hassle of cooking by hand when you have a slow cooker? Throw everything in there in the morning, then forget about it until dinner time. There's nothing better, right? But as easy as slow cookers are, they do come with rules. Here are some of the mistakes everyone seems to make when they use slow cookers, so you can be sure not to make them yourself. Taking a peek. We get it. Whatever's cooking in the slow cooker has your whole house smelling delicious. Gather up your willpower, though. You need to resist peeking inside. It took your slow cooker longer than you might think to work its way up to the target temperature, and lifting the lid for even a second lets out most of that hot air. Too much peeking means a reduced temp inside the slow cooker and more time needed for your dish to finish cooking. In fact, each time you lift that lid, you add 30 minutes to the time you need to cook your food. Using expensive cuts. Those fancy cuts of meat can certainly have their place at your dinner table, but there's no need to spring for the good stuff when you're shopping for a slow cooker meal. Since slow cookers cook low and slow, they make even the toughest meats tender and juicy. So grab a low-cost cut and let it cook all day. The resulting dish will be so fall-apart tender and full of flavor, no one will guess you bought the bargain beef. Not searing meat first. Be honest, if a recipe says to sear your meat before you drop it in the slow cooker, do you do that or do you skip it? It seems reasonable to skip it. It's going to cook all the way through in the slow cooker, right? Well, skipping the searing step does change the flavor of your dish and not necessarily for the better. According to the cooking site Kitchen, searing your meat before slow cooking it caramelizes the outside of each piece of meat, adding texture and an extra layer of flavor. If you've never seared your meat before slow cooking it, you really don't know what you're missing. But after you've tried it once, you'll never skip that step again. Cooking skin-on chicken. Chicken cooked with the skin in an oven or pan usually ends up gorgeous and crispy. When you're cooking in a slow cooker, you're probably going to end up with a soft, rubbery outside that's anything but appetizing. If you want to be able to serve dinner straight from your slow cooker with no extra steps, use skinless chicken when you slow cook. Fortunately, there's a workaround. If you don't mind the extra step, transfer the cooked chicken from the slow cooker to a broiler pan and cook it under your oven's broiler for just a few minutes until the skin is deliciously golden brown and crispy.
Yes! Yes!
Fresh versus dry herbs. With all the props given to fresh herbs, it's kind of refreshing to know that dried herbs are actually the preferred go-to seasoning in slow cooker meals. Since they do their best when cooked over long periods of time, dried herbs are the easy winners when it comes to your favorite slow-cooked recipes. That's not to say you can't use fresh herbs in a slow cooker recipe, just don't add them at the beginning. There won't be anything left when it's time to serve. Instead, toss those in toward the end of the cooking time, so they're still fresh and full of flavor when you sit down to eat. Using the wrong size. Slow cookers come in different sizes, and one slow cooker does not fit every slow cooker recipe. The cooking time on each recipe counts on the fact that you're using the same size slow cooker as the recipe directs, meaning it's filled to the appropriate level. Your slow cooker should be filled halfway to 3/4 of the way full. If it's not full enough, your food will end up overcooked. If it's too full, it may not cook completely, or you may end up with an overflow and a big mess on your kitchen counter. Adding dairy too soon. Dairy products don't do well warm, and the slow cooker is no exception. If you add ingredients like milk, cheese, cream, sour cream, or cream cheese too early in the cooking process, you'll have a curdled, disgusting mess at the end. To save your dish without sacrificing the creamy flavor you love, cook it without any dairy and then add those ingredients in during the last half hour, cooking them just long enough for them to melt and blend properly into the dish. Using too much alcohol. It's usually okay to use a heavy hand when cooking with wine on the stovetop. As heavy a hand as you want, really.
And then for Aunt Sandy, a bottle of white wine.
That's not the case with a slow cooker, though, because the lid stays on tight and nothing really evaporates. In fact, when you add wine to a slow cooker recipe, you'll taste more of the wine than you would in a stove-cooked dish. For that reason, it's best to skip the wine, or add it sparingly, unless you're really after that boozy tang. Cooking frozen food. As fabulous as it sounds, it's not a good idea to put frozen food, especially meat, in your slow cooker. If your slow cooker is full of frozen food, it'll take way too long to reach a safe temperature for consumption, meaning your food will spend longer than it should at temps that are less than safe. Don't eat that. Not layering correctly. Believe it or not, your slow cooker doesn't cook evenly all the way through. The foods at the bottom cook faster, so foods that need longer cooking times, like root vegetables, should go at the bottom of the slow cooker, followed by the meat, which cooks faster. Not greasing. Slow cookers may make cooking a breeze, but they can also make cleanup a pain. They usually end up soaking in your sink just as long as they spent cooking on your counter. And even then, you still need an awful lot of elbow grease to get them clean. Save yourself some time and use a cooking spray or a slow cooker liner to make cleanup that much easier.
From the method you're using to cook it to the kind of pan you use and how hot it is, there are all kinds of ways you could be doing your favorite breakfast meat a huge disservice. Here's everything you're doing wrong with your bacon and how to get it right.
Hi there. Thanks for joining me for a morning quickie.
Mornings can be hectic, but please don't try to shave a few minutes off your breakfast routine by heating a pan over super high heat and then throwing your straight from the fridge bacon into it. Will you get cooked bacon using this method? Sure. Will you want to eat said bacon? Probably not.
You'd assume the secret ingredient is love. It's actually bacon.
The problem with the cold bacon hot pan method is that all that glorious fat on those strips needs time to warm up and render out. If you toss cold meat into a hot pan, the fat immediately starts to seize up, resulting in bacon that has a gummy texture. For perfectly crisp strips with tender fat, start the bacon in a cold pan over medium-low heat and take your time. Going low and slow ensures the fat will render out properly and provides the bacon its own grease to cook and crisp in.
There is no better start to the day than eggs for breakfast. Except maybe eggs with a side of
bacon.
So you're slaving away over the stove, cooking your cold bacon in a cold pan just like you're supposed to. But your strips aren't perfect, and they're even burnt in places. What gives? When it comes to cooking bacon, not all pans are created equal. The cast iron skillet is king when it comes to bacon, and that's because of its heavy bottom that evenly conducts heat. Gone will be those burned edges that you get when you use aluminum, which gets too hot too fast and is also prone to random hot spots. As an added bonus, every time you cook bacon in your cast iron skillet, all that luscious grease seasons the pan. Proof that bacon really does make everything better.
It'd be the perfect thing to be drinking a beer, taking your time. I don't know if you want to be doing that at 9:30 on a Saturday morning, but that's your call.
This might seem like an odd way to ensure that your bacon is crisp and tender instead of dry and crumbly, but when America's Test Kitchen talks, we listen. And according to their experts, the secret to better bacon is water. To make this next-level bacon, they recommend covering the meat with water and putting the skillet over high heat. Though we keep hearing that high heat is bad for bacon, here the water keeps that cooking temperature low and allows the meat to retain its moisture and stay tender. Once boiling, reduce the heat to medium and continue simmering until all the water has evaporated. Then reduce the heat to medium-low and finish cooking the bacon until browned. The result?
And what you're left with is plump bacon that's pleasantly crisp and not tough or brittle.
If you're making bacon for a crowd, nobody wants to be stuck manning the stove while everyone else is enjoying their mimosas. The solution? Oven cook one huge batch and go join your brunch guests.
Fantastic.
Oven-cooked bacon seems fairly straightforward, but there are plenty of methods out there, all claiming to be the best. Thanks to J. Kenji Lopez-Alt at Serious Eats, who tested several of those methods, we now know which way is the best way. There are no wire racks, aluminum foil, parchment paper, or other tools required. Just a rimmed baking sheet and a 425-degree oven. Line up your strips, bake for about 20 minutes until crisp, and drain on paper towels. But if you just can't quit the wire rack method, consider following Alton Brown's advice to avoid the dreaded wailings of the smoke detector. When roasting bacon at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, try lining the pan with paper towels. They soak up the fat and prevent smoking. What's really the key to life-changing bacon? According to one GQ writer, it's a bacon press.
The world is split into two halves, the bacon and the bacon eaters.
The simple cast iron press, when coupled with a cast iron skillet, apparently has an enormous effect on breakfast meat. And that's because it allows each and every dip and curl of the bacon strip to come into contact with heat. As GQ's Josh Shearer explained, when you set a strip of bacon down in a pan, the wavy parts that aren't touching the cooking surface cook only from the rising steam. Floppy, steam-cooked bacon means you miss out on all the melt-in-your-mouth fat and perfectly browned bits of meat. With the bacon press, you'll be cooking up the most tantalizing bacon you ever laid your eyes on. Depending on who you ask, microwaving bacon can be a polarizing subject. While Bon Appetit implores, just no, please don't, others think it produces a perfectly edible finished product. Here's how to microwave your bacon so you don't regret it. Skip the paper towels and drape your bacon strips around the edge of a bowl. Place the bowl on top of a larger plate, then microwave until crisp. The fat will drip into the bowl or onto the plate, and the bacon will stay crisp. You're going to feel a little bit like Goldilocks here, but to make the best bacon, you've got to cook just the right amount, or risk a major breakfast fail. Though it might be tempting to get the job done fast and throw a bunch of bacon into the pan at once, it turns out that doing so is actually a recipe for disaster. According to Bon Appetit, you need to leave about an inch of space around each strip to allow the fat to render out and give the bacon a chance to crisp up rather than steaming in its close quarters and becoming limp and soggy.
You're doing it all wrong.
On the other hand, cooking too few strips of bacon can also end badly. Scott Vermeer of Prather Ranch Meat Company told Chowhound that cooking just 1 or 2 pieces of bacon doesn't allow enough fat to render out quickly enough, and therefore the pan doesn't stay lubricated. Unless you're into fully scorched bacon, nobody has time for that. Although the royals have some strict rules about food, they are apparently free to eat all the bacon they want. And according to a former royal chef, if that bacon is destined for Prince Harry's plate, it needs to be cooked especially to his tastes. Chef Darren McGrady explained to Food & Wine that an 8-year-old Prince Harry taught him a thing or two about how to cook the breakfast meat after a trip to Florida. He remembered, "It was after the royal family came back from Walt Disney World, and I had cooked bacon for breakfast. We serve the same bacon you can get in the States, and I broil it just the same. But Prince Harry said to me, 'We had it in America at Disney World, and it's so crispy you can snap it. You have to broil it first, and then you have to put it in some paper towels and place it in the microwave for a minute.' And I thought, yeah, okay, thank you, you little brat, teaching me how to cook. But as soon as he was gone, I tried it, and I got this amazingly crispy bacon." For his part, McGrady says he never went back to his old ways and used the broil plus microwave method from then on. Score 1 for Prince Harry.
I'm going to save our natural resources and respect our animal friends by becoming a vegetarian starting right now. Ooh, bacon!
Don't get us wrong, we won't say no to plain old bacon, but every once in a while, it's fun to switch things up, and it turns out that flavoring your own bacon might be easier than you thought. For this style, you'll want to cook it in the oven, as this allows you to easily add the flavor mixture and eliminates the need for constant flipping. The kitchen recommends using a foil-lined baking sheet and cooking the bacon in a 400-degree oven for 15 to 20 minutes before draining the fat from the pan. At that point, you're free to experiment with any concoction your heart desires. Cook for 5 more minutes, and boom! Flavored bacon. Try a classic combination like maple syrup and chipotle chili powder, or go bold with a mixture of sriracha, sesame oil, and honey. Or how about some roasted garlic bacon? The possibilities really are endless.
Give me all the bacon and eggs you have. Do you understand?
Aside from the deliciously salty meat itself, the second best thing that results from cooking up a big pan of bacon is the grease. Bacon grease is the secret ingredient you didn't know you needed. You can fry your eggs in it, use it in salad dressings, and add it to soups, stews, cookies, and caramels. Honestly, you can use it in pretty much anything you cook. While your grandma might have kept a tin of fat in her pantry, you might, understandably, want to abide by more stringent food safety measures. And that's as simple as pouring the grease through a strainer and sealing it up in a container to store in the fridge. The magic of bacon grease is that even when cold, it's still nice and pliable, ready for whatever your needs may be, even if it's just spreading it on a piece of toast.
That is a gorgeous piece of bacon.
Perhaps the only negative thing about bacon is the lingering scent it leaves behind. Thankfully, there are a few ways to abolish the ghost of bacon past. For starters, use a splatter shield, which helps cut down on the particles that get into the air and latch onto your countertops and walls. Second, run the exhaust fan on your stove or open the windows. Then wipe down any surfaces that may have been hit by splatter, wash the dirty dishes, and toss or launder any towels used in the cleaning process. Lastly, if you're basically one step away from bacon witness protection, spritz a little air freshener in the room and you'll be solid gold. Let's face it, the bacon cooking process can result in a pretty big mess. Whether you're using the stovetop, oven, or microwave, there's splatter, piles of paper towels, and pools of grease to clean. But there's a way to hack it. Commit to cooking the entire package, or two for that matter, at once. After the bacon has cooled, all those perfectly cooked strips are now ready for the freezer. The goal here is to ensure the bacon strips freeze individually so that you can grab however many you need. Simply lay parchment paper onto a baking sheet and line up the cooked strips so they're not touching. Depending on how much you have, you may need to add another layer of paper on top and start a new row of bacon. Throw in the freezer for 3 hours or overnight. Once frozen, store slices in a zip-top bag for up to 1 month. Whenever you need it, just microwave the frozen bacon for about 30 seconds. Though it might look a little silly, the bacon weave is more than just a bacon lover's gimmick. Believe it or not, this piece of latticework meat is the answer to many of your culinary woes, including dried-out meatloaf. With a bacon weave, inadequately topped burgers are a thing of the past. Add one to a BLT or burger, and you'll guarantee a substantial amount of salty meat with every mouthful. And then there's bacon-wrapped chicken, meatloaf, burger patties, or pork loin. Not only does it add impressive flair, it also adds tons of flavor and keeps foods from drying out. And it's not as complicated as it looks. Just weave full or half strips of bacon like a lattice until you've formed a large enough square. Then either bake it flat until crisp or wrap around the dish to be cooked.
Never add bacon. It ruins everything without bacon forever.
Burgers are one of the easiest things to cook, right? Make a patty and throw it on the cooktop. But there's a lot more to doing it right. So you can avoid the common mistakes people often make when cooking burgers, here are the finer points that make all the difference. When burger night rolls around in your household and you've got some meat stashed away in the freezer, how are you defrosting it? If you just set it out on the counter in the middle of the morning so that it's ready by dinner time, you might want to reconsider. Food safety guidelines from the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food Safety and Inspection Service say that the safest way to defrost meat is either by putting it in the refrigerator or running it under cold water in the sink. Why? It prevents any part of the frozen meat from reaching a temperature when bacteria can grow and thrive. It takes a little bit more planning, but it means that you can rest easy, knowing your meat won't get anyone in your family sick. If you absolutely must speed up the defrosting process, thaw your beef in the microwave. There are all different kinds of ground beef, which is really just an umbrella term for any cut of beef that's ground up into tiny bits. You can make ground beef out of the cheapest cuts on the market all the way up to prime steak. You can buy pre-made ground beef at the store or make your own at home. And beyond beef, there are all sorts of other ground meats you can add or use to create your perfect burger. So before you head to the store, consider your burger goals. Are you trying to tighten up your waistline? Is flavor your top priority? Will you be cooking your burgers on a skillet, on the grill, on a griddle? Many cooks recommend mixing a few different types of meat to achieve your desired flavor and consistency. But when it comes to straight ground beef, keep an eye on the ratio of fat to lean meat on the packaging. You'll want to use beef that's on the fattier side, with somewhere between 20% to 30% fat, Food & Wine recommends, to keep your burgers moist and tasty.
Here we have ground chuck. It's 80-20. We're looking for that 20% to really bring out all that flavor and that juiciness.
If you're making your own burger patties, pay close attention to how you handle your burgers. You really want to take a get in and get out approach. If you knead or work the meat too much, you'll end up with tough, chewy burgers. You should loosely mix in any seasonings, form your patties, and call it a day. And when forming your burger patties, take care not to pack the meat too tightly. Consider aiming for a meatball-like consistency, where the meat is lightly pressed together with just enough force to maintain its shape. This gives the lean meat and fat some room to breathe and meld during the cooking process. Pack your burgers too tightly, and you'll likely have a dense, hard-to-chew result.
Have you got any floss?
As for the shape of your patties, generally speaking, consistent size, shape, and density across all of your patties is the key. You want nice, even cooking throughout, as well as even cooking across all of your different patties. There's also a good reason why so many experienced barbecue cooks insist on putting a thumbprint in the middle of each patty. This little trick prevents your burgers from swelling up too much in the center, according to Delish. It's such a simple step, but it really helps a burger hold its shape during the cooking process.
The secret is to move it as less as possible. The more you move it, the more chance you've got of breaking the burger. And then look, on.
Before you go overboard and dump the contents of your entire seasoning rack into the bowl with your ground meat, take a deep breath and step back from the counter. Unless you legitimately hate the taste of whatever meat you're using, there's really no need to go overboard with seasonings and mix-ins. A burger should taste like a burger, and if you use too many fancy add-ins, you're going to completely overwhelm its flavor. You and your guests can always add more salt, seasonings, and toppings later, but it's almost impossible to remove these ingredients if you accidentally added too much.
No herbs, no chopped onions, no garlic, no soup mix, no mysteries, just salt. Why? Well, because it actually seasons the meat.
As for when to add the salt, it can be tricky. If you add salt too early and let your burger sit for a while, the salt is going to draw out some moisture that otherwise would have become delicious, flavorful juices. There are conflicting opinions about this, but the kitchen suggests it's best to add salt to your burgers right before slapping them on the grill. Other seasonings like pepper or garlic powder don't have the same drying properties as salt, so you're okay to add them whenever you'd like. There's a lot of prep work involved in grilling burgers. Making the patties, taking off the grill cover, checking the weather to make sure you won't get drenched. But don't skip checking your propane level if you're using a gas grill. Otherwise, after a few minutes of grilling, you may notice that the grill isn't hot anymore, and your food isn't really cooking because you ran out. Unless you have a spare propane tank, you'll have to figure out how to finish cooking the burgers somewhere else. If you're not sure how to check, some grills are equipped with built-in weight sensors that can indicate roughly how much propane you have left. If you don't have one of those, you can weigh your propane tank on a scale, then refer to the printed empty tank weight to calculate how much fuel is left, according to Ferrogas. You can also pour hot water down the side of your tank, then feel for the level at which the tank is still cool to the touch.
You'll feel it get extremely cold where there's propane in the tank. So from touch, I can tell this one's about halfway full. It's enough to tell you whether or not you have enough to cook or you need to go get some more.
If you're in a rush to eat, you may have cranked up the grill and placed your burgers on the grate as it heated up. But you're doing yourself a disservice by not letting your grill preheat, Savor warns.
It brings the grill up to temperature, which makes the food cook more efficiently, giving it more moisture, more flavor, and making it more tender.
Preheating your grill to a high temperature sears the burgers, just like you might do with an expensive steak. Searing creates that wonderful brown crust that's just packed with flavor and can help keep juices inside your burger. That won't happen if you let your burger heat up slowly with your grill. Searing is a chemical process, known in the food world as the Maillard reaction. That reaction occurs when a food's sugars and amino acids react to produce flavorful compounds. Another bit of important grill prep is to take a few minutes and thoroughly clean your cooking surface. Think of it this way: you wouldn't toss raw meat into a gross, dirty, charred pan and then put it in the oven, would you? You should hold your backyard barbecue grill to the same standard. Even if your grill has a cover or lid, it still sits outside in the elements, collecting dust, dirt, yard debris, and other nasties. Plus, that charred residue can actually harbor bacteria and cause your burgers to stick to the grates, making it much more difficult for you to flip them or pull them off the grill intact. There are a number of different ways you can clean your grill, ranging from soaking the grill grates in hot, soapy water to a quick and dirty scrubbing or washing if you need your grill to be clean ASAP. Unless you're using a smoker to cook your meats over the course of an entire day, grilling isn't really a set-it-and-forget-it type of cooking method. It's easy to get distracted if you're manning the grill at a party, but you really need to give your burgers your full attention. Most grills have hot spots, areas that are much hotter than others, according to the kitchen. If you're not already intimately familiar with your grill, this could be a recipe for disaster if you're grilling up a dozen burgers for a crowd. If you turn away from your grill, even just for a minute or two, the patties on these hot spots could burn very quickly. And that's a recipe for disaster. Even if you are familiar with the hot spots on your grill, you still need to pay attention for the entire cooking time. Sometimes this means rearranging your burger patties during cooking to make sure none of them sit on the hot spots or cold spots for too long. Other times it means flipping some patties sooner than others. It's also a good idea to stay right next to your grill from a safety perspective. You can never be too cautious around open flames and hot coals or highly flammable gas. Who doesn't love a good cheeseburger? It's a simple concept, right? Cheese on meat. But there's actually an art to making the perfect cheeseburger, and it all comes down to timing. Cheese is fairly delicate and melts rather easily, so you really don't want to put your cheese on top of a screaming hot burger inside the grill. Do this and you'll end up with messy cheese all over the place, everywhere except the top of your burger.
It's gonna get messy too.
Wait to put that slice of cheese on until just before or just after you remove the burgers from the heat. They'll still be plenty hot to melt the cheese to just the right consistency, and more of it will actually stay on top of the burger than drizzling down. Or you can place the sliced cheese on the bottom bun, then put your cooked burger patty on top, as Southern Living suggests. This gives you the freedom to then put the rest of your toppings and condiments on top of the burger, while still getting a nice melty cheese consistency. If you've seen your dad bring a knife outside and cut into one of the burgers to check for doneness, using the result to inform whether or not it's time to pull all the burgers off the cooking surface, don't model your behavior after him in this case. You're releasing all the juices you worked so hard to preserve throughout the cooking process. And checking your meat's color doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, especially if you're using a mix of meats or non-traditional burger meat. With ground beef, yes, you can use the pink color to help gauge your burger's doneness, but this just won't fly with a burger made of ground pork or turkey, which both tend to retain a pinkish hue even when they're thoroughly cooked. And what's thoroughly cooked? Technically speaking, you should never ever eat raw or undercooked beef. as it may contain harmful bacteria like E. coli.
Also mid-rare, but it's like raw.
It's little raw. So consider investing in a meat thermometer. This handy kitchen gadget removes all the guesswork out of cooking burgers and other meats. You can simply insert the probe and get the meat's temperature in a matter of seconds. For ground beef, the USDA recommends cooking burgers to an internal temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you're throwing some other entree on the grill at the same time as your burgers, you should know that the recommended cooking temperatures vary greatly for other types of meat. Chicken, for instance, needs to reach a temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit, while salmon only needs to reach 145 degrees. Make sure you're using the thermometer properly by inserting it into the thickest part of the meat and ensuring it doesn't poke out the other side or touch any of the grill elements. After you grill up your burgers, you may just want to sit back and relax with your dinner and a beer. But you've got one more job to do. Once you've pulled your burgers off the grill, bring the plate or pan you used to bring out the raw meat and any utensils you use back inside. Put them in the dishwasher immediately, or wash them in the sink with hot, soapy water. While you're at it, be sure to sanitize your entire kitchen counter and anything else the raw meat may have come into contact with. You can use hot, soapy water to clean surfaces, but the USDA also suggests using a solution made with 1 tablespoon of bleach per gallon of water. You should also wash your hands for at least 20 seconds, and encourage anyone who's helping to do the same.
I have recently been placed in charge of garbage. Do you have any that requires disposal?
No, it's totally empty.
Steak looks like simple fare, just a lump of cow exposed to high heat. But steak can be tough or just underwhelming if you don't treat it right, and it's more complicated than you might think. You've probably messed it up somehow in the past, but that's alright. We'll fix that now, and let you know what mistakes to avoid if you want to eat like royalty. There are lots of things that can go wrong to ruin your steak dinner. You can undercook the steak, overcook the steak, underseason it, overseason it, have a few too many drinks and forget about it entirely, the list goes on. But don't worry about all that just yet. In order to eat a good steak, you first have to buy a good steak. While it's easy to empty your wallet on the more fashionable cuts like sirloin, ribeye, and filet, with a little knowledge, you'll find that other bits of the cow come with delicious flavor but not the premium price tag. So if you want steak but struggle with the price, instead of those classic but expensive cuts, try throwing a hanger steak, a tri-tip, or short rib on the grill. Since they are likely to have more connective tissue or naturally be a little tougher, they may require a little more attention to cook just right, but if you make the effort, you definitely won't be sorry. When giving a choice between lean and fatty, most people will err on the side of lean. This is understandable if you're looking to cut calories, but otherwise you're probably better off buying a smaller, fattier piece of meat. This is because the fat often adds flavor and juiciness to the steak, especially when the fat is marbled throughout. Good marbling is an indicator of high-quality meat, and it is one of the things USDA inspectors look at when deciding on the rating. An even distribution of fine marbling is the best choice, and will earn the meat a USDA rating of prime for the best cuts. Those are so high on the scale, they're the ones sold in hotels and fancy restaurants. But the choice label meats is still a pretty decent piece of meat. Finally, there's select, which are leaner cuts that have a little less flavor. If you go below select, you're getting into generic store-brand plastic wrap meats. And although they offer financial advantages for the budget-conscious consumer, you'll probably incur net flavor losses if you go this route.
So as it cooks, this fat just imparts more and more flavor. It just melts in your mouth. Delicious.
While the USDA rating system is an easy shortcut to choosing a great piece of cow, there is really no substitute for years of experience to help you get the most for your money. That isn't to say you should struggle through years of hit-and-miss meals before you earn that experience for yourself. Although supermarkets and plastic wrap meat are convenient, there are other places you can go for your meat where good advice is included in the price per pound. Expert advice is invaluable, and good places to go for that are butcher shops, farmers markets, or the occasional supermarket with an actual in-house butcher, not just a local teenager wearing a bloody apron. The advice they can provide goes beyond the immediate questions like flavor and price, and can include information on the origin of the meat. That way, you can go home actually knowing what you're about to throw on the fire, rather than accepting the prepackaged fiction that can hide a whole host of culinary and ethical sins. With many of the other animal products that you probably have in your refrigerator or freezer, you'll typically want to get them to room temperature before you cook them. When it comes to steak though, having the meat start out on the cold side will work in your favor. Here's an example of just why this is so important. The internal temperature of a rare steak is around 125 degrees. So if you're cooking it from room temperature, say 72 degrees, the grill only needs to raise the internal temperature 53 degrees to hit that mark. But if you leave your steak in the fridge at around 35 degrees and throw it on the grill at that temperature, the grill now has to raise the inside temperature 90 degrees to get to the same place. The extra time required to heat the steak to the ideal temperature makes it easier for you to hit the window of perfect doneness. And it also gives the outside a little extra time for the Maillard reaction to take effect. That's the complicated chemical reaction that will get you that nice exterior char and produce that mouth-watering grilled flavor you're totally thinking about right now. This goes for frozen steaks too. Cooking steaks straight from frozen is better than thawing them before cooking because it results in more retained moisture and less overcooking. There are two ways your steak gets wet. It either comes out of the package covered in the natural glistening steak runoff comprised of myoglobin and water, or you decide to rinse it under the tap. Rinsing any meat is just a bad idea because while you think you're removing harmful bacteria and making the world a safer place, you're actually spreading it around your kitchen and into places you'll never think to hose down with bleach. Since you won't be rinsing your meat anymore, there's just the myoglobin left to consider, and those juices that look so much like blood aren't really a problem. However, if they're on the steak when you throw it on the grill, they'll get in the way of the Maillard reaction. The Maillard reaction really gets going around 300 degrees, which is easily achieved by most any grill. However, if the surface of your steak is wet when you start to cook it, the temperature of the steak will plateau at 212 degrees until the water boils off, and only then can it heat above the 300-degree threshold required for exquisite flavor to appear. But since the steak is also cooking while it's sitting at 212 degrees boiling off water, there won't be much time left for making flavor when it finally dries itself out. Give your steak a few good blots with a paper towel before cooking to ensure this isn't a problem. It goes without saying that you should season your steaks before you cook them, but are you seasoning them enough? Maybe you give them a light sprinkling and call it good. You'll find that although the light sprinkling seemed like just the right amount on the surface of the meat, it totally failed to take into account the iceberg nature of steaks in general. Most of the meat is below the surface. When you season your steak, you should apply a generous helping of kosher salt and pepper and rub it into the surface. You can't really go wrong with salt and pepper, and it's a completely legitimate way to start. If you're feeling adventurous though, you can take it much further. There are endless recipes for steak rubs and marinades to get your mouth watering. But a simple one to start with is made simply by adding garlic powder and onion powder to salt and pepper. Be warned that using exotic rubs and marinades might overpower the more subtle flavor of the meat, but that might be a good thing. If you only have access to a so-so cut, a sneaky rub might make all the difference to your meal. You're cooking a couple of classy steaks that cost you most of a day's wages, so you're going to do it right and cook them in some equally classy extra virgin olive oil, right? Wrong. Extra virgin olive oil might be the best choice for a lot of cooking, but it isn't cut out for the heat. Throw it on a nice salad and it's right at home. But throw it on a grill at 500 degrees and it will cut and run and leave bad flavors in its wake. Extra virgin olive oil has a low smoke point of around 320 degrees, and butter is a bit higher around 350 degrees. If you use either of these or any other oil with a similar smoke point, the oil will start smoking. Apart from the aforementioned bad flavors the oil will leave behind, the smoke may contain toxic chemicals. Better choices for grilling or frying steak include peanut oil, canola oil, and extra light olive oil, all of which have smoke points of above 400 degrees. Choosing the right oil will help you make tastier steaks, and when you fry steaks inside in the middle of winter, you won't turn your house into a really big meat smoker. Common wisdom would have you fling the steak on the grill or in the pan and flip it once halfway through the cooking time. And it would be hard to make a claim that this method doesn't work because a million tasty steaks have been cooked this exact way. But just because it works doesn't mean it's the best way. This method is trying to prevent unnecessarily removing the steak from the heat because it needs all the searing hot fire it can get during its brief time on the grill. However, extra flipping might be just what the doctor ordered, if the doctor was invited to dinner. Frequently flipping the steak actually helps it cook more evenly. The brief period of cooling lets excess heat escape and prevents the meat near the surface from overcooking. And it also helps the meat cook faster because although there is a small amount of heat loss, the temperature doesn't get down far enough for the cooking process to stop. Thus, flipping about every 30 seconds effectively cooks the meat from both sides at once and can shorten cooking times. Don't worry, this technique doesn't change the flavor much from the single flip method. Look at it this way, if you're engaged in a particularly interesting conversation, or if you would rather give your attention to a certain dinner guest than a charring hunk of meat, you won't harm your reputation by reverting. But if you want faster food or just an excuse to stop talking to a dinner guest for a few minutes, start flipping. If you've ever had a conversation about steak, you've probably heard of the poke test. According to this method, you can tell whether a steak is rare or well done simply by poking the steak with your finger and comparing its squishiness with different parts of your hand or face or whatever. The additional benefit of this method is that you avoid puncturing the steak with a meat thermometer and releasing the juices. There are two things immediately wrong with this. First, the difference in temperature between a medium rare steak and a rare steak is less than 10 degrees. If you can accurately tell the difference between the two by touch, please go on one of those reality TV shows that showcases weird talent. Second, a steak is not a water balloon. Sure, poking it with the meat thermometer will release some juice, but unless you've already severely messed up and cooked the steak virtually dry, the amount of liquid lost won't be noticeable to anyone who isn't mechanically designed to measure such things. The only real and honest way for an average, non-professional steak flinger to accurately distinguish the differences is with a decent meat thermometer. Besides, a meat thermometer looks totally pro, and your guests actually don't want you poking their food with your fingers just before you slap it on their plates.
Danny, how you cooked yours? Medium. Good man. So, touch it.
Steak is pretty awesome, and you can't be blamed for wanting to immediately shove it down your throat once it's off the heat. This is a mistake. As meat is cooked, the fibers start to shrink, and any water they contain is squeezed out and into the spaces between. The higher the temperature the meat achieves, the greater the effect. If you cut into the meat immediately after it comes off the grill, much of that liquid will run out onto your plate. However, if you cover the meat in foil and let it rest for 10 to 15 minutes, the fibers in the meat will have a chance to relax and let some of the juices back in. And here's one final word of advice. You should relax too. Cooking a quality steak can be a stressful experience for you as well as the steak, what with all the heat, spitting oils, charring meat, and short cook times. So if you don't give yourself a chance to chill and enjoy the process, you will have turned the chance to eat like royalty into nothing more than a medieval chef simulator.
People tend to think of chicken as an easy choice of meat, but the truth is that getting it right is actually pretty tough. You may even be surprised at just how many of these poultry-based mistakes you're making in the kitchen, and that chicken deserves better.
Who loves chicken? You do! We do! Delicious chicken, swing on through!
Just like with any kind of meat or fish, the first job when preparing chicken is choosing a high-quality cut or bird. People put a lot of thought into how their beef looks, and chicken really shouldn't be any different. There are a few key ways you can tell whether chicken is any good or not. Firstly, the meat ought to be bright pink all over, including the crevice areas, such as the thighs and wings. If that chicken is going gray, it's going bad. The flesh should be firm but not stiff and springy to the touch. Equally, chicken that has developed an odor should be avoided like the plague. Finally, there should be absolutely no blood visible in the meat. Follow those rules and you'll be going home with a potentially tasty chicken. There's nothing like a good, tender chicken breast to make a good meal, is there? After all, it's the cut of the bird with the most meat. It's easy to cook and it's super tasty. What's not to love? Well, it might give you the most meat, but the breast isn't actually the easiest to cook, and it's not the best either. Too many people gravitate towards it because it appears to be the choicest cut, causing them to overlook some far more interesting parts of the bird. That includes the most underrated chicken part of all, the thigh. The advantages of cooking with chicken thighs are numerous. They're even easier to cook than breasts, which are very easy to overdo. They have fantastic texture, season easily, and often just taste a whole lot better than the other parts of the chicken. Find a good recipe and you might never go back to breasts.
I will have a chicken breast. Hold the chicken.
By and large, the points we've hit so far have dealt with ensuring the meat you're using is high quality and suitable and results in deliciousness rather than disappointment. Now here's an altogether more serious element of the cooking process. Put short, never wash raw chicken. According to the USDA, running raw chicken under the tap will likely increase your risk of food poisoning. This is because the water droplets which splash onto the chicken from the tap can travel over 1.5 feet in any direction, and that means that raw chicken water is splattering all over cooking equipment, clothing, and kitchen surfaces. And given that it doesn't take much to cause you to come down with a case of food poisoning, misery that can last up to 5 days, you'll need to just trust the cooking process to kill bacteria. So just stop rinsing. Ideally, you want to cook chicken fresh and avoid freezing it at all. Sometimes, however, that's not an option, so you're forced to stick it in the freezer and defrost it later. If that's the case, make sure you don't thaw it on the counter, or you're just asking for trouble. According to the USDA, raw and cooked meat must be kept at a safe temperature during the thawing process. As soon as it begins to defrost and hits temperatures of 40 degrees and above, bacteria that might have been present in the meat can start to multiply. This will also happen if you let it sit at room temperature for more than 2 hours, or if you thaw it in hot water. If you've got to defrost chicken, the best way to do it is to let it slowly thaw in the refrigerator, where it'll stay at a cool enough temperature to stop all that nasty bacteria from spreading. You can also defrost it in cold water or in the microwave, as long as you get cooking from the very moment it's defrosted. If you don't remember anything else, remember that there's never any good reason to remove the skin, especially if you're using chicken thighs. That's because the chicken skin has a number of uses during cooking.
It acts as a kind of sponge full of tasty juices, and if you leave it on, they'll be released to the meat during the cooking process. It also protects that same meat from the heat and allows the meat to cook at a slower pace and retain its moisture. If you take the skin off before cooking, there's a good chance that what you find on the other end is a dry, tasteless chicken. If you really don't like the skin, just remove it after cooking instead. You'll find a use for it.
Silence of the lambs. Hello, Clarice. It's good to see you again.
Brining or marinating your chicken before cooking can be a game changer, and once you find your go-to method for chicken prep, you'll never go back. If you have some time, consider wet brining. That involves making a solution of salt, sugar, water, herbs, spices, and aromatics, which is then boiled, stirred, then cooled to kill any bacteria. Then submerge the entire bird or cuts, leaving them to brine for up to 2 days in the refrigerator. Dry brining is a similar technique in which the salt, sugar, and seasonings are rubbed straight onto the meat, allowing for a quicker turnaround since they'll soak in after just a few hours. Don't have that much time? Try marinating. And the good thing here is that even a quick soak and marinade for just 15 to 20 minutes will make a huge difference in the final product. In fact, you don't want to let it sit for too long, as it'll get stringy and mushy. No one wants that.
There'll be people watching this around the globe jealous of this chicken.
This is a must-do on the preparation checklist if you've got chicken breasts in mind for your recipe. Many of the issues that come with cooking chicken breast can be mitigated, if not avoided altogether, with a good bit of heavy tenderizing prior to cooking. Pounding and tenderizing the chicken helps spread out the thickness and allows the meat to cook more evenly and quickly. The process also makes the resulting chicken juicier and tastier, which is especially helpful considering chicken breast can often be neither of those things. The method is simple. All you have to do is wrap up the chicken in plastic wrap or put it in a plastic storage bag. Grab a heavy object such as a ladle or saucepan and start hitting it. Start from the thick part of the cut and slowly work your way to the thinner bits until the whole thing is finally thin and flat. Once that's done, you're ready to season and cook. Easy. This is probably the most downright criminal mistake people can make while cooking chicken, but we'd hazard a guess that it's probably a fairly common one too. Please don't forget to season your chicken. Meat that only has salt and or pepper added to it is bad enough, but serving up something without even that is just sinful. Here are some golden rules for seasoning chicken. Salt is the big dog, but you've got to get it right. Try to use kosher or sea salt to keep sodium levels down while getting maximum flavor. Make sure the other seasonings you're using are suitable for chicken. Good starting points include basil, rosemary, garlic, mustard, paprika, thyme, parsley, celery seed, cumin, and cayenne. But don't be afraid to play around. You never know what will work, and a failed experiment is still going to be far more satisfying than a tasteless, unseasoned husk of a bird. The word dry might seem like the exact opposite of what you want to hear, but the truth is that drying out your meat after brining is a must-do for any poultry cook worth their salt. According to James Wilschka, the executive chef of Filifera in Hollywood, people want to get really crispy meat, and the general rule of cooking is moisture is the enemy of caramelization. When you want to get meat crispy, you want the skin as dry as possible. You should air dry the meat out of its packaging in the fridge for up to 4 hours, although it could take up to a day or two if you're making something like fried chicken. Then, take it out, pat it down with a paper towel, and you're good to go. This might go against the instincts of anyone who's particularly safety conscious when it comes to handling and preparing raw meat, but it's actually a good idea to let your chicken sit out for a little while before you cook it. Tempering chicken has a few key benefits. It'll help your chicken hit that key temperature more quickly, helps the chicken cook more evenly all the way through, and makes the end result juicier. And that's never a bad thing, is it? As long as you're careful, the process isn't going to cause you any harm either. Don't allow it to sit out anywhere it can come into contact with other food. Wash your hands, and don't let it sit out for longer than 2 hours, and you'll be just fine. No surprise here, but it's always worth saying just in case. Always make sure your chicken is cooked to a hot enough temperature. Otherwise, you're just asking for a world of pain to come crashing down on top of you. The USDA states that the ideal temperature for chicken to be cooked at is 165 degrees. This temperature will effectively destroy Salmonella bacteria, which has the highest heat resistance of the pathogens that regularly grow on raw poultry. Certain cuts require higher temperatures, albeit for quality reasons more than safety ones. For example, whole muscle breast meat should be cooked at 170 degrees, while whole muscle thigh meat should be cooked as high as 180 degrees. The best way to ascertain whether your chicken has cooked through enough is to get a food thermometer. Stick it into the meat, make sure it's hit that golden number, and keep it cooking if it hasn't. It's a good habit to take on. This is another common mistake made during the actual process of cooking. If you're pan frying, pan searing, or sautéing chicken, you ought to make sure the pan is never overcrowded. This is because one of the main things which gives chicken its flavor is browning, a reaction which happens when the food comes into contact with very high temperatures.
You need some heat in that pan. Remember, no color, no flavor. No color, no
flavor. Unfortunately, if the pan is too crowded, the moisture that comes off the chicken will have no room to spread and evaporate, and it'll turn into steam or water instead. Instead of browning, the chicken will end up steaming and you'll have poached chicken. This is all easily avoidable. Just make sure there's plenty of room for the chicken in the pan. The pieces shouldn't be overlapping or smashed up against each other, and it's an easy fix for something that's a big deal. Getting it wrong can completely ruin your dish. This is the last thing you should do before serving up your chicken, especially if it's a roast. Resting involves allowing the chicken to sit out for anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes once it's cooked. The reasons for doing this are twofold. Firstly, cutting into chicken straight away can cause liquid to pool out and the meat will end up dry. Allowing it to sit for a while will help the chicken absorb the moisture back into the meat. Secondly, meat tends to continue to cook even after you've taken it out of the oven, and it's always good to let it continue to do so. It's even built into many recipes that suggest taking meat out of the oven just before it's done cooking for this reason. Take the chicken out, keep it in foil to make sure it stays warm, and keep yourself otherwise occupied for a while. It'll all be worth it in the end.
Air fryers are one of the hottest new kitchen appliances, but you can't just turn it on and throw your food in, otherwise you might end up with a broken machine or a burnt dinner. Here are the mistakes everyone makes with air fryers. While you don't have to build up a whole new recipe repertoire, assuming you can use your air fryer for old recipes while keeping things like temperature and cooking time the same is a pretty big mistake, one that can ruin dinner for sure. There are countless recipes that can be adapted to an air fryer with just a few tweaks. For starters, Taste of Home says that a good rule of thumb is to remember to lower the cooking temperature by 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, check out the recommended cooking time. You're going to want to take somewhere around 20% off that, and there's a bit of a catch. When you're thinking of the time it takes to cook something in an air fryer, it's not always as clear-cut as you might be used to if you're cooking something on a stovetop. Different air fryers are going to have different cooking times, so depending on your model, your cooking time might be a little more or less. Taste of Home says that French fries, for example, can take anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. When you're getting used to a new air fryer or trying a new recipe, think of a cooking time as more of a guideline than something that's set in stone, and know that it's not going to take the same amount of time as other cooking methods. It's normal to assume that the temperature settings on our kitchen appliances are correct, but that's not always the case. According to Taste of Home, the actual temperature that an air fryer runs at might not be near what you think you're setting it at. They found that different models ran either hotter or cooler, and that can mean the difference between crispy, delicious fries and fries that are not so great. Fortunately, double-checking the temp of your air fryer is pretty easy to do and just requires the use of an oven thermometer. And don't worry, this isn't just a one-time purchase that's going to get thrown in a drawer. Over time, the dials on your appliances can loosen and become much less precise. We found that it's best to check the temperature of your oven at least once every 6 months or so in order to make sure you're actually cooking things at the temperature you think you are. Once you know, you can make any adjustments necessary. No one wants a side of food poisoning along with their meal, so here's the thing. Even though air fryers seem like a pretty foolproof way to cook, you should definitely be double-checking to make sure everything's reached the proper temperature before serving. Brain's report tested a variety of air fryers and found that they had one thing in common. They all took longer to get food properly cooked than most guidelines suggested. They recommended toasting a slice of bread as a test. Some air fryers could toast it in about 3 minutes, while others took up to 10. That's not a huge deal when you're talking about bread, but when you're talking about cooking chicken, it could mean the difference between enjoying a delicious meal and getting up close and personal with salmonella. So when it comes to meats, you're going to want to not just eyeball it, but use a good instant read thermometer to make sure your meal is cooked all the way through. Take poultry, for instance. According to the USDA, all poultry needs to be cooked to a minimum internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when it's safe, and when it comes to food safety, it's better to be 100% sure you're on temperature, especially when you're using a cooking method that varies so widely. It turns out it's sort of a misnomer to call an air fryer by its name because you do in fact need to use oil when you cook with it. In the air fryer, you really only need about 1 to 2 teaspoons for most items, or up to 1 to 2 tablespoons for breaded items that you want to get really crispy.
Basically, it takes less than a spoon of oil for this thing really to make it work.
That's because while the hot air racing through your machine will cook things, without oil they can come out dry, burned, and leathery. Using just a touch of oil will help your food crisp up. This is especially true with fried and breaded items that you're heating up or cooking in your fryer. The oil on the outside of the food will get heated by the air, helping to cook the breaded items to a crispy golden brown. If you're trying to avoid added fats in your diet, you can use a non-stick cooking spray or oil from a spray bottle to make sure you use just enough to coat your food. Just be sure to spritz your ingredients before you put them in your air fryer basket, which will help keep your machine clean. Now that you know you still need oil in your air fryer, it can be easy to go too far in the other direction. For a lot of us, the impulse is to keep using the same amounts of oil as we do in traditional cooking methods, so that we can ensure everything comes out of the air fryer crispy and delicious. But unlike with traditional frying, where you want your food to be submerged at least partially in oil, in the air fryer you really only need a little bit of oil, like 1 to 2 teaspoons for most foods. Using any more oil can lead to soggy, burned food and is also a fire hazard. There are some things that just have a permanent place in kitchens across the country, and Pam is one of those things.
America's favorite no-stick spray.
This non-stick cooking spray can be a lifesaver, and it's easy to see how you might be tempted to pull out that aerosol can and see if it'll make cleaning up your air fryer a little easier. But don't do that. Air Cookers notes that most air fryers already have non-stick coatings, and these coatings can actually be damaged by the additives in some aerosol sprays. Some propellants currently in use will cause non-stick coatings to flake, and if you've noticed this happening with your pans, it's entirely possible your Pam habit is to blame. Fortunately, there's a quick fix. Pick up a non-aerosol pump sprayer or mister bottle and use it to add a mist of your favorite oil to not just your air fryer basket, but countless other cooking projects. It's tempting to just use your air fryer time and time again without cleaning it in between cooking sessions, especially since, unlike traditional frying, you're not left with a sloppy pan of oil to clean up. But that would be a mistake. A number of problems can arise if you don't clean your air fryer often enough. Crumbs and food particles left behind in the basket can burn the next time you use your fryer. Additionally, leftover oil residue in the drawer can smoke, imparting your food with off flavors and posing a fire hazard. The air fryer can also start to stink, making your kitchen smell foul. Instead of putting it off until next time, you should hand wash the air fryer basket, bottom tray, and drawer with warm water and dish soap after every session. All of the pieces should remove easily from your machine. Your machine will stay running smoothly so you can keep cooking your favorite foods. There's no such thing as a miracle product, so there are some things you need to do to make sure your air fryer works like a charm. You can't just throw your food in and then set the temperature. As with most other cooking methods, you need to preheat the air fryer before you use it. If you put a potato wedge in a cold pan of oil, it'll be a greasy beige mess when it's cooked through. The same is true of food made in the air fryer. You should preheat your air fryer for 10 minutes before you start cooking. Use that time to chop veggies and bread meats, or to catch a few more minutes of your favorite Netflix show. Preheating the air fryer will ensure that the ingredients in your basket start cooking immediately, crisping up on the outside instead of slowly steaming into a soggy mess. By the time your food is properly crisped outside, it will be steamy and tender inside, thanks to that quick preheat. Fried foods are nothing without seasoning, so you'll likely want to add a hefty pinch or sprinkle of your favorite spices to anything you make in the air fryer. However, you need to be careful. The air fryer works through convection, aggressively pushing hot air around your food to cook it.
I simply let the hot air do the work for me.
This means any seasoning that isn't fully adhered to your ingredients can end up getting caught up by the rush of air, leaving you with unseasoned food and a filthy air fryer.
It's a whirlwind of superheated air.
The same goes for crispy coatings and other light ingredients. To ensure that you don't wind up with a flying salt and pepper disaster, be mindful about when you season. For instance, spray veggies with oil before adding seasoning so it has something to stick to. Or season the flour, beaten egg, and crispy coating directly when making chicken tenders and the like, instead of sprinkling them with seasoning after breading. Maybe your favorite churro recipe uses a batter, or you're used to dunking hot dogs into a thick cornmeal sludge before making your famous corn dogs. Well, if you want to keep using loose batters to bread your foods, you'll need to stick to traditional pan and deep frying. If you try to put ingredients covered in a wet batter in your air fryer, the batter will sink through the basket and wind up burning in the drawer below. Instead, make crispy fried foods by using dry breadings or doughs. Many swear that a classic 3-part breading process works best in the air fryer. First, coat your ingredient in seasoned flour, then dip it in beaten egg, and finally coat it in breadcrumbs. Spritz each piece lightly with oil and cook in your air fryer until done. Your result? Golden brown, crispy air-fried foods that have less fat than their traditionally made counterparts, but just as much flavor. If you got your air fryer because you're trying to eat healthier foods like unprocessed fresh veggies, you might be surprised to hear this next fact. You're better off using frozen vegetables in your air fryer, not fresh. Unfortunately, raw veggies tend to scorch in the air fryer before the insides can be cooked all the way through. Frozen vegetables, on the other hand, have more moisture. This allows them to cook fully before starting to brown, so you don't wind up with a charred exterior and frozen interior. Luckily, most frozen veggies are frozen at the peak of freshness, so you still get the same robust flavor you'd expect when cooking a raw vegetable, sometimes even better. How many times have you microwaved or baked your leftover pizza, orange chicken, or french fries only to be greeted with a plate of food that's soggy when it should be crispy, burnt and hard when it should be soft, and leathery and tough when it should be tender? All of those leftovers end up going to waste. The air fryer is a champ when it comes to reheating your favorite leftovers. Pizza stays crispy on the bottom while melting the cheese on top. Tater tots and fries are re-crisped to perfection. Pretty much any solid food is better reheated in the air fryer than anywhere else. With a name like air fryer, it's understandable that some people think you can only make fried foods in one of these devices. Luckily for the more adventurous foodies among us, this isn't the case. While frozen and leftover fried foods both taste delicious when you make them in your air fryer, it's even better for making crispy breaded foods from scratch. You'll be able to customize the recipe to your liking, meaning you can skip the additives, preservatives, and high sodium found in most frozen foods, so that you wind up with much crispier food than if you baked in the oven. Better yet, your foods will still be lower in fat than if you fried them in the traditional manner. Try breading chicken or pork chops, or making a fresh batch of chicken parmesan in your air fryer to save time. One of the reasons why air fryers are such a great tool in the kitchen is that they're versatile. It turns out you can even make your favorite baked goods in one. Why make baked goods in the air fryer? It doesn't use up as much energy as heating up your entire oven, and in the warmer months, it's one way to make sure that you aren't turning your house into an oven just because you were craving chocolate cake. The other reason? It's easy to convert conventional oven recipes into air fryer recipes when it comes to baked goods. Set your air fryer to the same temperature as the original recipe calls for and cook your items for the same amount of time. The one thing you will need to be conscious of is the size of your air fryer. Some have round baskets, others have square baskets, so you need to be mindful of which inserts you can use inside your fryer. Remember too that ramekins and silicone molds can also be used in your air fryer to make individual-sized desserts that will cook up quickly. And on that note, you do always need to use some sort of pan or insert when baking in the air fryer. If not, batter and dough will seep through the holes at the bottom of your air fryer basket, burning and creating a potential fire hazard. Most air fryers come with a basic basket, and that's all you'll need to make classic favorites like french fries, frozen fried foods, and many reheated leftovers. But if you really want to get your money's worth out of the air fryer, investing in some accessories will help. As we've already noted, your air fryer should always be set on a heat-proof surface. If your countertop isn't made to withstand high temperatures, you'd be wise to invest in a silicone mat to set your air fryer on before you start cooking. One of those is a lot more affordable than replacing your entire countertop. There are accessories that go inside the air fryer that can make it more useful too. Look for cake pans, silicone molds, ramekins, racks, and other cooking devices that can fit inside your air fryer basket. These will help you make a much wider variety of foods in your air fryer without having to worry about spillage, overflow, or burning, so you can get as much use out of your new device as possible. Also, be on the lookout for things that make cleaning up your air fryer easier. This includes oil sprayers, which will help prevent stuck-on food, and parchment paper lines, which keep the bottom of your fryer clean. The easier it is to take care of, the more inclined you'll be to use it. It doesn't matter how much you like to cook, there's one universal truth that goes along with that. No one likes to be the one to clean up. And sure, air fryers might be convenient, but they can be a hassle to clean. As easy as it might be to take a shortcut at the end, you shouldn't. Getting the basket and drawer of an air fryer clean is a pain, and getting them dry is even more of a pain, if that is, you're using a towel. There's no need. In order to get your air fryer completely dry and avoid that almost inevitable, slightly funky smell you'll notice if you leave something that's sealed sitting on your countertop for a bit, Blue Jean Chef says there's an easy fix. After giving it a thorough scrub, replace the basket and the dryer and turn your air fryer on for just a few minutes. All that extra moisture, gone. If you've tried every trick in the book, taken every bit of advice you've been given, and are still having trouble getting your air fryer meals to come out as good as everyone else swears theirs do, here's some good news. It might not be anything you're doing at all. Which is a consumer watchdog and advocate group in the UK, and they looked at air fryers to see how price impacted quality. They found that in many cases, price did make a difference. While there were some cheap air fryers out there that got the job done when it came to something like a single serving of fries, spending a little more money made a huge difference when it came to things like capacity, the versatility of being able to cook more than one thing at a time, and smart controls. If you buy a cheap air fryer, you might find yourself dealing with a model that doesn't even have a power cord long enough to safely position it in your kitchen. BBC Good Food found similar things. When they tested a series of air fryers, they found one decent budget model, while all their other recommendations were between $207 and $345. The bottom line seems to be that if you went on the cheap side for your air fryer, there's a good chance it might not put out a satisfactory meal even if you do everything right. An upgrade might be in order.
Mushrooms are wonderful to keep on hand because the subtle, nutty flavor can enhance so many dishes. Whether you like to add mushrooms on top of frozen pizzas, toss them into salads, or add them to risottos, there are so many ways to cook with mushrooms. There are a few common mistakes people tend to make when cooking mushrooms, however. For the best results, you'll want to steer clear of these mishaps. One of the biggest mistakes is that people like to wash their mushrooms before cooking them. The truth is that mushrooms have a ton of water in them already, and thanks to their texture, mushrooms act like sponges. That means they take on even more water when washed and become waterlogged. It's much better to simply brush them off with a damp paper towel instead of washing them. Another water-related mistake people make is cooking mushrooms slowly on low heat. This causes the extra moisture inside the mushrooms to leak out, so the fungi get steamed more than anything. That will only give you soggy mushrooms, when ideally all of the water should be evaporated before they come off the stovetop. Water is your biggest enemy when cooking mushrooms, and water-related mistakes are the biggest problem most people encounter while cooking mushrooms. There are, however, a few other common mistakes that can compromise or just prevent your mushrooms from being the absolute best they can be. One of those more minor problems is slicing. That's not the only way to go when preparing mushrooms. Some mushrooms, especially smaller ones, are great whole. Other mushrooms with great texture, which are usually wilder-looking mushrooms, are delicious when torn, instead of sliced or quartered. Two of the last and more common mistakes are overcrowding the pan and not using enough oil. Similar to having too much water in the pan, when mushrooms are overcrowded, there is not enough space for the water to evaporate. This is another way the mushrooms can sit and simmer for a soggy finish. Just as it's easy to have too much water in the pan, it's easy to not have enough oil in the pan. Remember, mushrooms are like sponges, so they'll soak up all of the oil in the pan if there is only a little. That's why it's important to use enough. Should you add the appropriate amount of oil to the pan and avoid crowding the mushrooms, you're not exactly away from the danger of poorly cooking your mushrooms. Another common mistake people make while cooking mushrooms is not leaving them on the heat long enough. It is actually quite easy to undercook your mushrooms. The reason you want to make sure you cook the mushrooms for long enough is that they will be more flavorful when the excess liquid is cooked out. Since mushrooms do contain so much liquid, you want to leave them on the heat long enough to get rid of the unwanted liquid and let them caramelize, making them delicious. Just keep an eye on them so they don't overcook either.
I'm freaking out right now, man. The mushrooms are turning on me.
One more thing to keep in mind while cooking mushrooms is that you don't want to salt the mushrooms as soon as they are in the pan. This causes the water to be drawn out of the mushrooms, which can cause the fungi to become tough. Plus, the mushrooms will have less flavor. You want to add salt when they've caramelized and the liquid has cooked out. This will ensure they have great color, flavor, and texture. While it's certainly a game changer to know how to handle mushrooms when cooking them, it's equally important to know how to care for them before they hit the stovetop. Mushrooms need to be bought carefully and stored properly to ensure they will be their best selves after they're cooked. The first tip to ensure your mushrooms will come out perfectly is to avoid buying pre-packaged mushrooms. When you buy loose mushrooms, you can limit the amount based on what you need, and it will allow you to select and eat them at their best. It's also cheaper to buy loose mushrooms. Finally, if you can only buy mushrooms in plastic bags or pre-packaged in plastic, make sure you remove them from the plastic to store them. The plastic locks in moisture, and the containers are actually too damp for the mushrooms to be stored for long. The excess moisture is actually what causes your newly purchased mushrooms to turn moldy and go soft. Use a paper bag to store mushrooms instead, since it will absorb extra moisture while affording better air circulation.
When you take innocent ingredients and mess around with them to make a meal, it can be easy to screw it up, and this is especially true for salmon. Here are a few common mistakes people make when they cook this delicate and delicious fish. Any meal that features salmon has to start with actually sourcing your salmon.
What are you doing? Only selling the finest farm-raised salmon in the county, that's all.
Yeah, they're all free-range. No nets, no cages. They can go wherever they want.
Plus, we have smoked salmon.
But fresh or frozen, checking out the appearance is a good way to assess fish quality. Different varieties of salmon will have variations in color and flavor, but in general, brighter colors are better than pale ones. As Epicurious notes, avoid any fish that looks dried out or has a brown color instead of uniform reds and pinks.
Quick, can I use y'all's microwave right quick?
When you're in a rush to eat, it can be tempting to lean on the microwave to unfreeze your food, but this doesn't work at all for salmon. Since microwaves pretty much never thaw things evenly, and considering fish is more sensitive to heat than many other foods, this uneven heating will result in rubbery, dry fillets that even your cat's not gonna eat.
No thanks, I'm full.
As a general rule, avoid thawing fish using any heat at all. Opt instead for thawing overnight in the fridge or in a sealed bag under cold running water.
Can I change my answer?
Removing fish bones is a tedious task, but no matter how well you prepare that expensive fillet, all will be forgotten when your guests are choking on bones. Even if you buy a piece of salmon from the fishmonger and the larger bones have already been removed, there still could be tiny pin bones remaining. If you run a knife against the grain, you'll feel the ends of the bones poking out of the flesh. With a clean pair of needle-nose pliers and a bit of patience, you can carefully pull out all the remaining bones one by one. Definitely season your salmon, but only just before you start to cook it. Since salt can be used for preserving meat and fish, sprinkling it on your fish too early might actually start to cure your meal before you cook it. And seasoning the cooking water is especially important if you're poaching your fish. The seasoning should not only be rubbed on the salmon, but added to the water as well. That way it doesn't wash off during the cooking process. Try poaching salmon with white wine, shallots, and dill, then finish with freshly ground pepper and a squeeze of lemon.
You are beautiful, Susie Salmon.
If salmon were an opera singer, it would be the prima donna, talented and deserving of praise, but also super sensitive and egotistical.
Your public needs you. We need you too.
Would you not rather have your precious little ingenue?
Treat a piece of salmon right by giving it its space and a little me time, and it will totally melt in your mouth. But smother it with way too much attention, and it falls apart under the pressure.
I'm melting! Melting!
In the case of salmon, this means that once you've put it on the heat, leave it alone. Salmon cooks best when it's placed over a fairly high heat for just long enough to turn the flesh opaque. If you cover the fish while it cooks, you may not need to turn it at all. But if it's cooking on the grill, turn it over just once, about halfway through. Any dish that requires perfect timing can tempt nervous cooks to check in a little too many times. But if you don't leave it alone, you'll worry your salmon all the way into the trash. It turns out, overcooking your salmon may be the biggest mistake of them all. No one likes tough, rubbery fish, but the line between sushi and fish leather is not very wide. Some cooking methods, like poaching or wrapping in foil, are safer than others. But no matter how you apply the heat, there's only one result if you do it for too long.
There's just no way that salmon can survive in those sort of environments.
The ideal time to remove salmon from the heat is just before it's done, so you can allow it to sit for a few minutes. The residual heat will finish the cooking process, and if you're still unsure, you can use a meat thermometer, aiming for about 145 degrees. The more often you cook, and as you get to know your own preferences, you might decide to lower that final temperature just a little bit. But be warned, if you typically make too many of these mistakes, your family and friends might not let you make dinner ever again.
It's hard to beat the satisfaction of a perfectly fried egg, but chances are you're making at least one of these mistakes. You have more to worry about than grabbing the right pan or using the correct heat. Have you even thought about using an egg ring? Keep watching to learn more. If you use the wrong type of pan to fry an egg, you're setting yourself up for failure from the start. Luckily, you can avoid this common mistake by opting for a quality non-stick or well-seasoned cast iron. That way, your fried eggs don't stick and fall apart when you take them out of the pan. Joseph Provost, a chemistry and biochemistry professor at the University of San Diego, explains to the Washington Post why it matters, saying, Most pans, even the really good ones, are actually filled with little cracks and crevices. When the pan gets hot, the metal expands and the liquid from your eggs get trapped in those cracks. Cue the sticking. A non-stick pan solves this problem because it puts a smooth, seamless barrier between the metal of the pan and the eggs as they cook. Frying eggs in cast iron works too, but we mean it when we say the pan needs to be well seasoned. If that thing is getting rusty, put it down and learn how to properly season it pronto. If you want to make the perfect fried egg, you're going to want to fry it in some kind of fat. Not only does fat impart loads of flavor, but it also acts as a physical barrier between the eggs and the bottom of the pan to stop them from sticking. This can often save your fried eggs whether you're using a non-stick or not. While any kind of fat will do, including olive oil and bacon grease, Harold McGee, author of Keys to Good Cooking, a guide to making the best of foods and recipes, recommends butter because it, quote, carries anti-sticking emulsifiers. This can be especially helpful with eggs, as their high protein content makes them more prone to sticking because heat causes proteins and carbohydrates in food to form bonds with a pan's surface. Another fat we like to use for frying eggs is heavy cream. It might sound a little weird, but hear us out. Cream is rich in butter fat and, in a way, acts like liquid butter because it breaks down into buttermilk and butter fat as it cooks. In the end, you get fried eggs that are gently steamed and crispy around the edges, with an extra bit of flavor similar to browned butter. It's nearly always best to use a hot pan to fry your eggs. In fact, you should follow this advice for most food that you're looking to fry, sear, or crisp. According to Science of Cooking, when food hits a hot pan, it will start to sear almost immediately, releasing small amounts of water and creating a tiny layer of steam that literally lifts it from the bottom of the pan, preventing it from sticking. If you're frying in fat, which again, we think you should, add it once the pan is hot and let it heat up for a few more seconds before adding the eggs. This will create those perfectly crispy edges you're looking for. Butter melts quickly, and you'll know it's hot enough to add the eggs when the foam subsides. Oil, on the other hand, will shimmer slightly when it's ready to go. It's nearly always best to use a hot pan, but the exception is frying eggs in heavy cream. For that method, you'll want to pour the cream into a cool pan, then turn on the heat and bring the cream to a boil. Another pro tip is to let your eggs come to room temperature before you crack them. According to The Guardian, starting with a cold egg causes the whites to take longer to set, which means you risk overcooking the yolk. Food Network veteran Robert Irvine swears by this method, explaining on Twitter that all foods should be room temperature when cooked so that, quote, when they hit high temp, they don't steam. While some steam when the food starts to sear is good, too much means losing the crispy edges that make a fried egg so pleasant. So, how long do eggs take to come to room temperature? According to Food Network, it depends on the temperature of your kitchen, but on a cold winter morning, it can take up to 2 hours. You can also bring eggs to room temperature in 5 minutes by placing them in a bowl of very warm tap water, though please make sure it isn't too hot or your eggs will start cooking. The Guardian indicates that fresher eggs are more suitable for frying because the proteins are stronger and hold together better. As Chef Yasmin Alsawaf explains to Eat This, Not That, when an egg ages, the whites and yolk thin out. This means that the white will spread instead of being compact and thick, and the yolk won't sit atop the whites perfectly. You can tell how fresh eggs are with a simple float test. Carefully drop the egg into a bowl of water. If it sinks to the bottom and lands horizontally, it's super fresh. But an egg that floats to the top is rotten.
Taste these eggs.
What if your egg lands somewhere in between, sinking and drifting slowly toward the middle of the bowl or standing vertically on the bottom? If it isn't expired, you don't have to trash it. Just use it for baking or hard boil it. You might think cracking an egg is straightforward. Just smack it on the lip of your frying pan and dump it in. But there is a better way to do it, and it doesn't include any fancy one-handed flourishes. Instead, simply give it a quick, confident tap on a flat surface, like a cutting board or counter, then gently press your thumbs into the crack you've made to break the membrane and let the egg slide out. This method is less likely to break the yolk or split the eggshell into multiple pieces, whereas cracking an egg on the lip of a pan or bowl actually pushes the shell back into the egg, increasing your chances of a runaway shard.
I don't want to lie to you, so I'm not. The shell's all in these eggs.
Bobby Flay, a gold mine of cooking tips, also recommends cracking each egg into a bowl before adding it to the pan, rather than cracking it straight in. This gives you a chance to remove any stray shell pieces and makes it easier to get an evenly shaped fried egg. The most satisfying part of a perfectly fried egg is breaking into the deliciously creamy yolk. But the goal is for that to happen on the plate, not in the pan. Proper egg cracking technique is crucial, as is first breaking your eggs into a bowl so they glide into the pan rather than smacking it with a splatter. Being able to flip the eggs is critical, and an egg that doesn't stick allows you to slide a spatula underneath. Masterclass recommends carefully lifting the egg before tipping the spatula slowly but deftly until the uncooked corner of the egg touches the pan, and then laying it carefully yolk side down. Once your eggs hit the pan, Tasty warns against moving them while they sizzle, crisp, and cook. But don't back away from the stove. This is your chance to take your fried eggs from good to great by basting them in butter, oil, heavy cream, or bacon grease. Not only does this add tons of delicious, complex flavor, but it also helps your fried eggs cook evenly without requiring a flip. All you need for basting is a wide spoon. Don't forget to use a wooden or heat-resistant silicone spoon if you're using a non-stick pan. Then, as the eggs are frying, tip the pan slightly toward you so the butter or whatever fat you're using pools at the edge. Dip your spoon into that liquid gold and ladle it gently and continuously over the eggs as they cook, being careful not to break the yolk until the whites are just set. Paprika might just be the best-kept secret to a perfect fried egg. The trick is to add the paprika to whatever fat you're using before you add the eggs, in order to allow the spice to toast and deepen in flavor. Then, when the paprika becomes fragrant and turns a beautiful dark red color, add your eggs and baste them continuously as they cook to infuse the rich flavors.
Paprika! Paprika. That's so nice.
Now that you're sold, let's talk about paprika. There are 3 kinds: sweet, smoked, and hot. Use any one of them, depending on the flavor you want. If you've ever been told to fry eggs over low heat, forget that advice immediately. According to the Food Network, frying eggs over medium-high heat is essential to obtain crispy, irresistible edges. So don't be afraid to turn it up. Within reason, of course. Tasty describes that a sunny-side-up egg is cooked to perfection when the whites start to bubble up and are nearly set. The edges are golden brown and the yolk is bright yellow and still a little runny. Give the pan a gentle shake to see. The yolk should jiggle, but the whites should not. If you're making your fried eggs over easy, over medium, or over hard, you'll want to give them a flip. For over easy eggs, you want set whites with very runny yolks. Taste of Home notes that it typically takes about 30 seconds of post-flip frying. For over medium eggs, you're looking for set whites with a firmer yet slightly runny yolk that is fairly firm to the touch. These take about a minute of post-flip frying. And finally, if you want over hard eggs with yolks that are fully cooked, fry them for another 2 to 3 full minutes after flipping. Ever wondered how places like McDonald's make perfectly round eggs for your breakfast sandwich? Get yourself an egg ring and you can do it too. Egg rings are exactly what they sound like. Rings made for cooking eggs. Invented by Herb Peterson, the creator of the Egg McMuffin himself, with the help of a local blacksmith in 1971, per Good Food Journey, egg rings are typically about 3 inches in diameter and made to sit directly in your frying pan. Just place them in, heat the pan, and pour the egg into the ring. Chicago Tribune recommends cracking each egg into a small glass bowl before pouring it into the ring for a smoother, less mess-prone method. Once the egg is cooked through to your preference, simply remove the ring with a pair of tongs and use a spatula to take it out of the pan. It might be hard to justify buying one if you don't eat eggs all the time, but you better believe we have a hack. Just use the ring from a mason jar lid. It works the same way. But remember to grease the inside before you use it. If you need to whip up a killer breakfast for multiple people at once, sheet pan fried eggs will truly change your life. As family recipe blogger Susan Oleinka of the Flexible Fridge tells Mashed, sheet pan eggs let you make 10 to 12 eggs at a time. And a sheet pan full of sunny side up eggs also looks super cool. A bonus when you're cooking for a crowd. Step 1 is to preheat your oven and your sheet pan. Spray the pan with oil. Turn your oven to 475 degrees and stick the pan inside to heat. A hot pan will allow the eggs to cook more quickly and make them less likely to stick. Sound familiar? It should, because it's the same advice we recommend for a frying pan. Next up, grab a dozen eggs. Crack them all into a bowl with a lip made for pouring, and then, once the oven is preheated and the pan is hot, carefully tip your eggs out onto your hot pan. Add your seasonings. We like sea salt, freshly cracked black pepper, and a dash of paprika. And pop that baby back in the oven. Bake for just 5 minutes, then slice the eggs into squares, 1 yolk each, and serve them right away so they won't keep cooking in the pan.
It may seem impossible to mess up frozen pizza from a box, but there are some definite do's and don'ts. Are you cutting the pizza too soon? Not baking at the right temperature? Keep watching for what not to do. Sometimes, when you pull the frozen pizza out of the box and remove the plastic sleeve that's usually encasing it, the toppings are all over the place. Your instinct might be to just shove them all back to the center or get them scattered as evenly across the surface as possible if they've all gone to one side. Even if this topping side shift hasn't happened when you pull the pizza out, it's actually still a good idea to methodically rearrange the toppings before baking it. Per Taste of Home, if you envision where the cutter is going to slice through when the pizza is frozen, you can easily assemble the toppings so that you can guarantee space for a quote clean cut when you slice. If you employ this hack correctly, when you slice the pizza cutter doesn't have to cut through anything except the bread, sauce, and cheese. This trick yields a lot less mess and whole pepperonis still intact. It might sound odd to not follow the exact instructions on the side of the frozen pizza box, but hear us out on this one. You know how pizzeria pizza is always the perfect texture of crust combined with cheese melted to the ideal consistency? A big component of how they pull that off in restaurants is an industrial oven that's designed to get extremely hot for cooking pizzas. You can replicate this at home without an official pizza oven if you crank up the temperature of your kitchen's oven to 550 degrees, according to the pizza experts from Giordano's Pizza. Then just bake the pizza for about 5 to 8 minutes, as opposed to the usual 12 to 15 minutes. While it may be tempting to slide that pizza cutter right into that pie as soon as you pull it out of the oven, try to hold off on cutting into it too soon. There are a few reasons why you might mess up the pizza if you cut into it the minute it's done. For one, the cheese and toppings need a chance to set. The suggestion from the kitchen warriors is to let the pizza sit at room temperature for just 3 minutes before cutting into it. That way, the toppings and cheese are still piping hot, but set enough to where you won't pull the pizza cutter up with a lot of melted cheese along with it. Also, when you cut into the pizza too soon, you run the risk of the oil from the cheese running into the crust, soaking it, and therefore making it less crispy. Oh, and also, your pizza isn't going to taste as good if the roof of your mouth is burned, so it's best to wait if you can. Pizza stones may seem like the tools of advanced pizza chefs, not someone popping in a pepperoni DiGiorno at home, but they're actually a very easy way to enhance the taste of any frozen pizza too. Pizza stones serve to imitate the magic of a real-deal brick oven that a legit pizza place would use, because the stone easily takes in high heat, then keeps that heat in for an extended time. If you're going to use a pizza stone with a frozen pizza, make sure to preheat the stone in the oven for at least 30 minutes after the oven has reached the temperature you set it to, and to let the pizza thaw to room temperature before you place it on the hot stone. Having a pizza peel on hand would also be helpful for safely retrieving the hot pizza from the stone when it's done.
Who wants cheese? Me, please.
There is nothing wrong with wanting to add some extra cheese to a frozen pizza, but there is definitely a wrong way to do it. It's important to keep that in mind when you add the extra cheese. Serious Eats recommends sprinkling it on halfway through the cooking process, but the placement can also depend on the type of cheese you're adding. For example, per Cooking Chops, most frozen pizzas already come with a layer of shredded mozzarella, so you can probably get away with adding it before you place the pizza in the oven. However, if you're adding cheddar cheese to the frozen pizza, it cooks a lot faster, so you may want to add it on when you hit the halfway mark of baking. Adding extra vegetable toppings to frozen pizza isn't necessarily a bad idea, but you can really mess up the final product if you don't do a little prep work on the veggies prior to adding them. Basically, the vegetables need to be sliced, softened, and/or roasted first, and the exact prep will depend on the vegetable. For instance, The Guardian relays that mushrooms can end up disastrous if you don't sauté them with some butter first to soften them. Onions will emerge even more raw-seeming than before if you don't sweat them prior to adding them on top of the pizza. Bell peppers should, in a perfect world, be both skinned and roasted in advance of going onto the pizza. Part of the appeal of frozen pizza is all the hard work is done for you. It's convenient and quick already, so why add more work? Well, certain tweaks are less than a minute of work, so they're worth the effort. You can actually take the frozen pizza from mediocre to insta-worthy by supplying the pie with an extra dash of herbs prior to cooking it. Add some dried or fresh oregano to frozen pizza to enhance the flavor. Thyme is also a great add-in because it's kind of sweet and therefore a nice contrast to the savory cheese on the pizza. Garlic makes everything better, but it's technically a vegetable unless you want to go with the powdered kind, in which case we'll toss it in as a contender for the added herbs on pizza. A little salt and pepper never hurt either. One of the most basic ways you might be messing up your frozen pizza is not utilizing the grill if you've got one. Sure, the oven is the standard go-to for cooking a frozen pizza, but the grill is virtually just as easy and the results might really wow you. According to The Kitchen, this hack works best with a 10-inch pizza. Make sure the grill is preheated for about 15 minutes on the high setting. Then add the frozen pizza, reduce the heat, and cover the grill. Keep watch on it, but the cooking time frame should be about 10 to 12 minutes. Place the grilled pizza onto a cutting board with a spatula as soon as the cheese has fully melted and you see that good char has developed around the crust.
No backyard barbecue is complete without hot dogs on the scene. There's something distinctly satisfying about chomping into the perfect one. Turn up the heat on your hot dog game by avoiding these common mistakes. For starters, the best way to cook hot dogs is on the grill, not boiled in water.
I've been reusing the hot dog water so it gets more flavor. It's only going to keep getting better.
But you don't want to neglect preparing your grill before tossing the hot dogs on top. Make sure the grates are clean and free of gunk from previous grill sessions. If you're worried about the franks sticking to the grates, spray them with a non-stick cooking spray. Then preheat the grill for a few minutes before you start cooking. The heat level also matters when it comes to cooking hot dogs. While you shouldn't shy away from high heat since you want to achieve that coveted char on the outside, you also don't want to burn the franks before the insides have cooked all the way through. To avoid undercooking or overcooking your hot dogs, place them on the grill grate in indirect heat away from the flames. Doing so allows you to cook the hot dogs quickly and effectively without any chance of going too far. While hot dogs belong in the category of casual foods, that doesn't mean you should opt for the cheapest options available. As a rule of thumb, the simpler the dish, the more the quality of the ingredients you choose matters. From chicken and turkey to pork and beef, you'll quickly discover that there are a wide array of hot dogs available to you at the supermarket. With all the choices out there, go with your taste preference, but don't just pick the cheapest ones. The inexpensive varieties tend to come without casings and are made using a hodgepodge of meats, tons of sodium, and lots of preservatives. Some of them are barely worthy to even be called hot dogs.
Not hot dog?
Wait, what the f***?
Moreover, higher quality beef franks just taste better all around. With more nuanced flavor and fewer shady additives to contend with, you can just sit back, fire up the grill, and enjoy the crisp snap of biting into a perfectly cooked hot dog. While some might argue that splitting a hot dog partway down the center or making small slashes on top keeps the casing from bursting and lets the frank cook all the way through, it's usually an unnecessary step. Since most store-bought hot dogs are pre-cooked anyway, they're already cooked through. Splitting them open lets out all the juices that make the meat tender and moist. If you're working with encased hot dogs that have been pre-cooked, skip the butter flying. However, if you're using raw hot dogs you get at the butcher's, you might find that splitting them open helps them cook more thoroughly. Hot dogs are small portions of meat, so they cook quicker than you think. Because they can burn or cook unevenly, it's crucial that you pay attention to them during cooking. Using tongs or a spatula, be sure to move the hot dogs frequently, rolling them around continuously so every side gets touched by the heat source. You also want to place them just right so you get those stunning grill marks. Arrange your hot dogs perpendicular to the grill grates, spacing them apart. By doing so, you should be guaranteed grill mark victory with all the franks. The hot dogs are as important as the buns that hold them. Hot dogs are a classic food, so don't treat them like any other meat and bread combo. It's not a hoagie, so you don't want a bun that's overly firm. For the ideal hot dog presentation, choose buns that are similar in texture to the most exquisite burger buns. These should be soft, squishy, and just the right length for the hot dogs you've chosen to pair them with.
Not good for my buns unless you like them soggy.
You've come too far to not toast the buns for your perfectly cooked hot dogs. To toast your bun, simply brush both cut sides with a small amount of butter and plop them on the grill or the pan for a few minutes. By taking the extra time to do so, you get to enjoy all the layers of textures that can be tasted in a truly satisfying hot dog.
Did you just take a bite of yourself?
Actually, yeah. I'm pretty delicious.
When cooked properly, a sweet potato is delicious. With a characteristically creamy interior and a nuanced, delicate sweetness, the sweet potato is the perfect base for both savory meals and mouth-watering desserts. Here are some of the top mistakes you're making when you cook sweet potatoes.
It's like a sweet potato.
Potatoes can be sweet?
Just like regular potatoes, sweet potatoes are tubers. Since the sweet potato is actually the starchy, fibrous root of a plant, it grows underground, covered in dirt and soil. While farmers and distributors do their best to get each sweet potato cleaned up and tidied before they get to grocery stores and farmers markets, most of the sweet potatoes you buy are likely to have some residual dirt still on the skin. On top of dirt, your sweet potatoes could have pesticides and other unsavory pieces of debris on their skins. While it's easy to get lazy and assume that your sweet potatoes have been well cleaned already, you should really be scrubbing them thoroughly with a vegetable brush and some warm water before you actually start cooking or cutting into them. Even if you're not planning on eating the skin of your sweet potato, it's a good idea to give them a good cleaning before you peel them, since dirt and debris from the skin could come into contact with the flesh of your sweet potato during the peeling and/or cutting process. Sweet potatoes are an extremely hardy and durable vegetable. As a result, it takes a really long time for them to go bad. Under just the right conditions, root vegetables can last notoriously long, and sweet potatoes are no exception. But it's important to note that the right conditions are necessary. Sweet potatoes need to be in a dry, somewhat cool environment. Room temperature is perfect for these vegetables. Basements and cellars are ideal, but your kitchen pantry is likely a good spot for them as well. The fridge? Not so much. According to the North Carolina Sweet Potato Commission, putting sweet potatoes in the fridge can yield a hard center and may negatively affect the taste. Additionally, you may find that refrigerated sweet potatoes get a bit dry and shriveled. Unlike other root vegetables that can last an entire season or more, sweet potatoes will only last you around a month in the pantry. Still, that's a much longer shelf life than most other non-root vegetables. From your traditional orange sweet potatoes to speckled white and purple ones, there's a lot of sweet potato varieties to choose from. And just like you might find that Yukon Gold potatoes are better for mashed potatoes than, say, russet potatoes, there's a right way to use the different kinds of sweet potatoes you'll find on the market. According to the Huffington Post, there are two main types of sweet potatoes grown and sold in North America, one with golden skin and white flesh, and another with copper skin and orange flesh, the latter being the one you probably envision when you think about sweet potatoes. But on top of those two predominant sweet potatoes, you'll also find plenty of other types, such as Japanese purple sweet potatoes and Haiman sweet potatoes, which have a yellow-green flesh. Now, they all have the same basic flavor, but they can have vastly different structural characteristics, meaning that they'll each hold up to different cooking methods differently. White variants tend to have a texture that's sort of in between the firm russet potato and the creamy orange sweet potatoes. As a result, they crisp up much better than orange variants and are great for making sweet potato fries. On the other hand, if you're making a sweet potato casserole, the orange variant should be your go-to, as they have a richer and creamier consistency. Sweet potatoes are great any time of the day. Whether it's a sweet potato hash at breakfast time or roasted sweet potatoes at dinner, they're bound to make an incredible meal if you cook them right. But if you're limiting yourself to savory preparations of the sweet potato, you're missing out on so many amazing desserts that could be made with the starchy root vegetable. After all, it's in the name that they're sweet, so why not use that sugary, saccharine quality to your advantage? We're not just talking sweet potato casserole either. Yes, sweet potato casserole can be a delicious treat at Thanksgiving dinner, but there are also a huge number of more refined and nuanced sweet potato-based desserts that deserve more widespread appreciation. From the classic sweet potato pie to more off-the-wall recipes like sweet potato brownies, there are so many different ways to incorporate sweet potato into your dessert repertoire. Since sweet potatoes are naturally quite sweet, they allow you to cut down the sugar content in your homemade desserts a bit, while also adding a more complex, almost caramel-like sweetness that refined sugars just don't have. When you're making roasted sweet potatoes, you want to be careful about the amount of oil you're using to coat the potatoes. For the most part, less is better. Olive oil adds a nice, rich quality to the potatoes, but adding too much can make them soggy and will prevent them from crisping up quite right. You can even get away with not using oil at all, especially if you're roasting a sweet potato whole. With roasted sweet potatoes that have been cut into pieces, the oil is more about adding flavor to the potato. Using a neutral oil for roasted sweet potatoes is fine, but to really maximize the flavor of your sweet potato, use one of your favorite olive oils, or even a little bit of melted melted butter to boost the wow factor. The oil helps them stay moist while allowing them to crisp up on the outside, and really ups the richness of the whole dish. Add too much though, and you'll have a greasy, unpleasant mess on your plate. If you're new to roasting sweet potato, stick to around 1 tablespoon of oil for 1 large sweet potato. You can always adjust and add a bit more for taste later, but you can't really reverse the effects of adding too much oil to the roasting pan. Sweet potato casserole is a bizarrely unique American dish that's become a Thanksgiving staple for so many families. Quartz reported in 2018, it's a highly divisive concoction that appears on Americans' dining room tables for its annual cameo, to the delight of some and the disgust of others. While sweet potatoes and marshmallows are just a really odd pairing, it's also probable that home chefs are simply making their sweet potato casserole a little bit too sweet. If you're adding heaps of sugar to your sweet potato casserole, you may be overdoing it. Sweet potatoes are naturally sweet, so you shouldn't be adding huge amounts of sugar to your casserole. Otherwise, the sweetness gets a little crazy.
It's organic sweet potatoes, and I put them in the pressure cooker, and I just, let them absorb their own natural sweetness.
Since sweet potatoes have a nice, rich sweetness that's much more subtle and nuanced than sugar, adding lots more in the casserole will overpower that distinctive natural sweetness and dumb down the complex flavors of the dish. When it comes to eating sweet potatoes, it's no secret that the sweet, velvety interior is the main attraction, but that doesn't mean you should do away with the skins entirely. Certain preparations of sweet potato will call for peeling them, but there are plenty of other times where keeping the skin attached to the flesh will actually enhance the flavor and texture of your meal, while also providing a number of beneficial nutrients. On the whole, unpeeled fruits and vegetables tend to have more vitamins, antioxidants, and fiber than their peeled counterparts. This is certainly true of sweet potatoes. Leaving the skins on will significantly increase the fiber content of your sweet potato, as well as supplying you with plenty of valuable minerals like potassium and magnesium. All of these are present in the flesh as well, but in marginal proportions. Livestrong says an unpeeled sweet potato contains around 475 milligrams of potassium per 100 grams. Peeled sweet potatoes only have about 230 milligrams per 100 grams, meaning that more than half the potassium is located in the skin. If you're eating sweet potato for their nutritional value, tossing out the skin is one of the biggest mistakes you can make, as a peeled sweet potato simply lacks the nutritional value of an unpeeled one. For the most part, boiling your vegetables is one of the worst ways to cook them if you're trying to maximize the nutritional content. Plus, it leaves you with bland and mushy veggies, no matter the vegetable you're boiling. The same goes for sweet potatoes. When you boil or steam them, the water leaches out the nutrients present in the vegetables, which diminishes their nutritional value significantly, unless you're using the water you cook them in for stock or stew. If you want to get the most bang for your buck nutrition-wise, it's recommended that you roast your sweet potatoes with their skins on and wrapped in foil so as to minimize nutrient loss during the cooking process. As with any food item that you buy from your local supermarket or farmer's market, you want to carefully observe your sweet potatoes before plopping them into your shopping basket. While ugly sweet potatoes that are weirdly gnarled and strangely shaped are alright to purchase, avoid buying any sweet potatoes that appear to be bruised or have cuts and gouges that reveal some of the flesh. Bruises and cuts can expose the flesh to bacteria, which will speed up the process of spoilage. Chances are, if the sweet potato has any of these blemishes at the point of purchase, they've already begun to go bad and will be even more unsavory by the time you decide to actually cook them. During the shipping process, some sweet potatoes are bound to get bruised or cut up a bit. This is the nature of boxing and transporting produce, and there's not much we can do about it. But for every damaged sweet potato in your grocery store, you should be able to find plenty of unblemished and robust ones that are perfectly fresh and ready to cook up. While sweet potatoes can last a long time, if they're not kept in the right conditions, they can easily go bad. If you've had a sweet potato sitting in your kitchen for a week or two, you want to keep an eye on it and make sure there aren't any signs of your tuber taking a dive. Before cooking your sweet potato, always give it a thorough inspection to make sure that it's as fresh as can be, so you don't have to worry about any of the health risks associated with eating spoiled food. It may have been gorgeous when you bought it, but like all fruits and veggies, they don't stay that way forever. It's pretty easy to tell if your sweet potato has gone bad. For example, if the softness is limited to one spot on the sweet potato, it may be tempting to cut off this region of the potato and cook the rest. But you should really toss the whole thing into a compost bin, as this means the flavor of the entire potato will be altered, and it may not even be safe to eat. Are you trying to eat healthier and thinking about ordering a side of sweet potato fries instead of those good old regular French fries next time you go out to lunch? Not so fast! Sweet potatoes have a reputation for being the healthier alternative to regular potatoes, when in actuality, the health benefits of choosing sweet potatoes over regular ones are not all that huge. While sweet potatoes are definitely a healthier option, their nutritional content is only marginally better than white potatoes. And the cooking method used can vastly affect the nutritional content of the veggies as well. Sweet potatoes and potatoes have nearly identical caloric content, as well as the same amount of protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Nutrient-wise, sweet potatoes have a slight edge, but regular white potatoes actually have more potassium than sweet potatoes.
Ross, could you pass me the yams?
Sure. Oh, and Joey's got the mashed potatoes if you want to exchange them.
When it comes to beef stew, there are actually a lot of little details you need to pay attention to if you want your dish to be a hit, not a disappointment. These are some of the common mistakes you're probably making with your beef stew, and what to do instead for the perfect dish. When looking for stew meat, skip the fancy steak and look for a heartier, tougher cut of beef. You want meat that has a lot of collagen-rich connective tissue, which will break down over the low and slow cooking period, leading to chunks of beef that are tender and flavorful, not dry and tough. Turn to cuts like a chuck roast or a round roast. Both of these meats are tough and chewy if you cook them up quickly, but cook them slowly and the collagen and fat within melts and tenderizes the protein, while also adding lots of flavor and body to the broth of your stew. These cuts are also usually much cheaper per pound than the fancier steaks on the market, which only adds to their appeal as stew meat. It's definitely tempting to throw all of your beef stew ingredients into the pot all at once and to start cooking right away, and many recipes tell you to do just that. But if you simply set and forget your stew, you're missing out on a lot of flavor. To add a depth of savory, meaty flavor to your beef stew, you should always sear your meat before you start the braising process. You can brown your beef right in the same pot you're going to make the stew in. Add the cubed, seasoned meat in batches to a pot over medium-high heat, letting it caramelize on the outside, but not cooking it through. Remove the seared beef and repeat until all of it is finished. Make sure you don't overcrowd the pan. The caramelization process adds extra depth of flavor to your stew, and the brown bits at the bottom of the pan can be scraped up with a wooden spoon when you add the broth, which will infuse the liquid with even more rich flavor. If you're using a slow cooker, it's still worth it to sear your meat before adding it to the pot. And don't forget to deglaze the pan you use to sear the beef, adding the prize liquid to the slow cooker too before continuing on. A little extra time and effort can take your beef stew from tasting like something that could have come out of a can to something you could imagine serving company alongside a nice bottle of red wine and some crusty bread. The secret? You need to cook with plenty of aromatics like onion, garlic, fresh herbs, and spices. Sear your beef first. Then sauté onions, garlic, carrots, and celery in the beef fat, scraping the browned bits up from the bottom as you go. When the veggies are somewhat softened, add your spices. This way, their flavors will infuse the oil. You can go in several directions with the spices you use. Garlic powder, onion powder, black pepper, smoked paprika, and dried bay leaf all work very well. Or you could take things in another direction and add cumin, coriander, star anise, and cinnamon for a more Moroccan flair. Unlike with a roast or a steak, where the flavor of your dish is concentrated on the surface of the meat, in a beef stew, you need to focus on the liquid that all of the ingredients are being cooked in if you want to make sure it's infused with flavor. That being said, there are some things to look out for. Store-bought stock can be overly salty. If you're already salting the rest of the ingredients as you prepare them, adding a store-bought stock might make the dish a little too salty. This is especially true if you plan on reducing your stew to thicken the broth. As the water evaporates out of the stew, the salty flavor will become concentrated. If you want to use a store-bought stock, look for low-sodium or unsalted varieties, so you can adjust the seasoning to taste instead of having to rely on whatever's in the can or carton. You also shouldn't use plain water to make your beef stew. Yes, the meat and veggies will be able to impart some flavor in the liquid, but it still won't reach its flavor potential. If you need a substitute for beef stock, even swapping it for chicken, veggie, or mushroom stock is better than nothing. You can also use plain water with bouillon cubes, paste, or powder added, though again, you need to watch out for the salt level. When we think of a perfect beef stew, we imagine succulent bites of meat, slightly sweet, tender vegetables, and a rich, silky broth holding everything together. You want a velvety, slightly thickened broth that has a lip-smacking viscosity, not one that turns into a thick paste once it starts to get cold.
It's so thick!
Some recipes advise using flour, a cornstarch slurry, or a roux to give your stew's broth some heft, but those starchy solutions can lead to trouble. Your beef stew shouldn't be thick and gloppy like a can of dog food when it's done cooking, and using a heavy hand with those shortcut thickening methods can do just that. They can also dull the flavor of your broth, obscuring the rich, meaty tastes you worked so hard to develop with blandness. Your stew broth should naturally thicken while cooking, thanks to the release of starch from the potatoes in your stew and also from the collagen that cooks out of the meat, adding body to your liquid. Choosing a well-marbled cut of meat means that your stew will have a luxurious, rich texture, thanks to the collagen, gelatin, and beef fat that renders out as your stew cooks at a low and slow temperature. But it can also mean that when your stew is done cooking, there's a thick sheen of fat floating on top, which is not exactly appetizing. That's why, once your stew is cooked, you should use a spoon to skim off the fat that's floating on the top of the broth. You can also trim off any large pieces of fat that are on your stew beef before you sear and cook it, so that it never ends up swamping your stew in the first place. If you want to make the process even easier, you can pop your stew in the refrigerator. The fat will rise to the top and congeal. Then, you can scrape the firm layer of fat from the top of your pot. When you reheat the stew, the extra fat will be gone, letting the meaty richness of the broth shine through. You might not think it, but adding a little something tangy to your beef stew will give a subtle brightness to a heavy dish. There are a few different ways you can add acid to your beef stew. You can add diced tomatoes, tomato paste, or some red wine into the pot at the beginning of cooking. As the stew simmers, the harsh acidity will be toned down, until you're left with just a kick at the end of cooking, which will liven up the flavor and add some brightness to the dish. You can also add a splash of vinegar at the end of cooking if you taste your stew and realize it still needs that little extra something.
Get some raw veggies, bacon, a cup of soup. Baby, I had a stew going.
Much as you might love it, there are a lot of potential errors when it comes to cooking pork. The pork cut you're making is also important when it comes to prepping and cooking your pork to perfection. Here's how to avoid some big mistakes everyone makes when cooking pork. The first mistake you can make with pork starts at the very first step, choosing your cut. Not all pork is created equally, after all. Different cuts have to be prepared and cooked differently. For example, if you're making pulled pork, you'll want a pork cut that's big and marbled with a lot of fat, like a pork shoulder or butt. The fat in such a cut will keep your meat moist and tender during the prolonged cooking process.
Oh, look at that, look at that. Can I get a little?
Can I have some? Please, just give me some.
If you want a super juicy pork chop that's grilled to perfection on the outside, you've got to go with a bone-in cut, according to Southern Living. That bone will help to regulate the internal temperature and prevent overcooking, while some swear that it also lends all-important flavor to the final chop. While we're at it, know that it's also important to understand the difference between a pork loin and a tenderloin, which not only have different fat distributions but also come from completely different parts of the animal. And of course, pay attention to the quality of the meat you're buying. Buying better pork or even heritage pork over factory farmed meat will give you a more tasty end result every time, no matter how you prepare it. No matter what type of protein you're cooking with, seasoning meat is pretty much a rule across the board. Pork is no different. Seasoning your pork thoroughly will not only mean maximum flavor in every bite, but can help create a crisp, delightful texture on the outside when cooked over high heat. At the very least, don't skimp on the salt and pepper, no matter what type of pork you're working with. That's especially true when you're cooking leaner cuts of pork, like loin chops and tenderloin. They can be tasteless if under-seasoned. When the seasonings mix with the rendered fat and seared meat during the cooking process, the results are delectable. There are other ways of imparting great seasoning into your pork too. Spice rubs are always a good idea, bringing in even more flavor than the simple salt and pepper duo. Especially if you're going for barbecue ribs or a whole pork roast, be generous with a rub that's full of spices and aromatics to create deep flavors. You may also want to consider soaking your cut of pork in a salty brine before cooking to impart extra flavor. And don't forget the power of marinades. Unless you're going for the leanest part of the pig, most good cuts of pork will have at least some fat around the edges or even marbled throughout. This is a good thing, lending richness and flavor to the final product. You certainly aren't doing your pork any favors by trimming it off before cooking. The fat adds a ton of flavor while also keeping the meat moist while cooking. That fat is especially key for juicy pork chops. If you're concerned about the fat for health reasons, then trim it off after the meat is cooked, right before serving. One exception to consider is when making pulled pork. Trimming at least some of the fat on a pork shoulder will allow more of the meat to become browned and caramelized during the cooking process. Most of that fat would be cooked off and discarded at the end anyway, so there's arguably not much additional harm in trimming a portion of the fat beforehand, but only in this particular situation. While it's important that raw pork, or any kind of meat for that matter, not be left out of the fridge for too long, it's also not a good idea to throw cold pork straight onto your hot pan or grill. That's because the exterior will finish cooking before the inside is done. This could result in either an unappetizing and identifiably undercooked piece of pork or one that's way too charred on the outside while the interior is just barely done. The key is to strike a balance. It's best to let your meat sit out to temper, which means to come to room temperature. Tempering can actually help the meat stay juicier while also allowing it to cook more evenly. It doesn't have to sit out for long. Even just the time it takes for you to chop up some veggies will make the difference. It's pretty common knowledge that you want some oil involved when adding a piece of meat to a hot pan, all in order to keep it from burning or sticking. But rather than drizzling oil onto your pan before cooking your pork, consider a better way. Try oiling your pork directly rather than the pan itself. This will give the meat an even barrier of heat protection and will also help keep your oil from drying out or burning up in the pan too fast, and leaving your cut of meat to overcook or burn. If you're grilling your pork, coating it in oil will also help keep it from sticking to the grates or drying out. It's especially useful to coat your pork in oil if you're planning to apply a rub to it. This will help the seasoning stick evenly to the whole surface, letting the flavor fully penetrate the meat. We're all about cooking pork low and slow. Whether in the slow cooker or roasted in the oven, that longer cook time and lower temperature makes for fall-apart, perfectly tender pork loins, shoulder roasts, pork butts, and more. But there's a key step you must not forget to master the flavor of slow-cooked pork: browning, or searing, the surface of your meat before fully cooking it. Searing a pork roast before cooking is said to make it more flavorful, mostly via caramelization, as any sugar in the meat or add-ins begins to cook down. Browning your pork roast will create a crisp crust on the outside, adding an enjoyable textural element along with amped-up flavor. The exposure to sudden high heat creates what's known as the Maillard reaction, which allows fat that's naturally found in meat to render and turn brown on the surface, creating more flavor as well as texture. The Maillard reaction is mainly focused on high-protein foods with plenty of amino acids. Caramelization, its close cousin, is a similar process that refers to the reforming of sugars during the cooking process. While we've established the importance of getting a good sear on your pork to impart delicious flavor and a crispy outer texture, there's an important tip to keep in mind throughout that process. Keeping your pork on that super high heat for too long can ruin your meal, drying out the meat or charring the outside, neither of which is going to taste great. To avoid this mishap, all you need to do is pay attention to your pork and recipe. Once you achieve a dark brown sear on all sides of your meat, which shouldn't take more than a few minutes per side, take it off the high heat and continue cooking in the oven or slow cooker. Or in some cases, just let it rest in the pan until it's ready to serve. Do it right and you should be left with pork that's juicy on the inside with a tasty crust on the outside. To put it simply, do not undercook your pork. This mistake can lead to a higher risk for dangerous foodborne illnesses. According to Healthline, raw or undercooked pork can potentially carry bacteria and parasites, including trichinosis and tapeworms. This can lead to infections, weight loss, and a host of other highly unpleasant symptoms. To avoid this risk, the National Pork Board, along with the USDA, says that pork should always be cooked to an internal temperature of at least 145 degrees Fahrenheit. The safest and easiest way to guarantee your pork has reached a safe temperature for consumption is to use a digital meat thermometer. Insert the thermometer into the center of the thickest part of the cut of meat, avoiding the bone, to get an accurate temperature reading on your pork. This takes only an extra minute or two and can save you a lot of grief post-meal. If you haven't caught on yet, cooking delicious pork is a balancing act. And while undercooking pork is a serious mistake that can potentially make you sick, it is also possible to overcook pork. The results will be dry, chewy, and all around unappetizing. Pork cooked to 145 degrees may look a little pinker, but this is not an indicator of doneness, and it will actually ensure that the meat retains some of its natural juices. Remember also that, like quite a few foods, pork will continue to cook on its own a little after it's been taken off the heat, so it's a good idea to remove it from the oven or stove a few degrees before it's completely cooked, checking the internal temperature with a meat thermometer, of course. That way you can hit a perfect sweet spot of done but not dry. Look, we get it. You go through all the work to pick out and prepare a juicy cut of pork, rub it down with delicious seasoning, and then cook it up to sizzling, seared perfection. Now you're ready to dig in and reap the rewards. Well, hold on there. All your time and effort will be for nothing if you skip the absolutely crucial post-cooking step when it comes to your pork. We're talking about resting. When meat is heated, the muscle fibers tighten and all the juices collect in the center. If you cut into it right away, those juices will spill right out onto your cutting board. However, when meat is removed from heat and allowed to rest, the muscles relax as everything cools down, and the juices redistribute throughout the meat. The amount of time your meat needs to rest depends on how big it is, but you want to leave it until the inside of the meat cools down to about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The only exception to the resting rule is for meat that's been braised or cooked at a really low temperature, including pork that's made in the slow cooker. Since the meat is already at a lower temperature, it's less imperative that you let it rest before digging in. While there are a variety of ways you can go about cooking up pork chops, pork roasts, tenderloins, and the like, when it comes to pork belly, there's really only one good way to prepare it, and that's the long and slow method. Pork belly literally comes from exactly where you expect on a pig, and it has a super high fat content. That means that if it's not cooked the right way, the heat won't be able to penetrate all the way through the meat, and the pork belly will become rubbery, rather than having that tender texture we all know and love. For luscious, melt-in-your-mouth pork belly every time, your best bet is to braise or roast it at a lower temperature for a longer period of time. This will allow all that fat to render down and surround all the meat as it cooks. If you want crispy skin on the outside, throw it in a super hot pan or under the broiler for a few minutes at the end of your cook time to crisp up the exterior just right. In the family of pork products, bacon is in a league of its own. It's an American staple of breakfasts, burgers, and beyond. The truth is that you can get it wrong, though thankfully there are tons of tips and tricks for how to do bacon better. But perhaps the biggest and most common mistake people make with bacon is trying to fry it up in the wrong kind of pan.
It's bacon.
I know it's bacon, honey. What have you done to it?
From the kitchen experts at Bon Appetit to the connoisseurs at Southern Living and professional bacon lovers in between, there is agreement across the board that a cold cast iron skillet is key to making perfect pan-fried bacon every time. Cast iron does a beautiful job of evenly conducting heat throughout its surface, ensuring that you won't have to deal with troublesome hot spots or low temperature zones in the pan. And tossing the bacon on cold, then slowly heating it up along with the pan, ensures that the bacon fat renders rather than burns, resulting in crispy yet tender bacon that won't curl up and crumble.
As easy as oatmeal may be to prepare, and with as many variations of the dish creative cooks can devise, there's actually a fair amount of ways to mess it up. These are the huge mistakes just about everyone makes with oatmeal. The biggest mistake often seen when preparing oatmeal is eating the oats undercooked. While it's not dangerous, it can cause other problems for many of us. And we're not just talking about an unpleasant taste or texture. Nutritionist Alicia Harper said in an interview, "Undercooked oats are known to cause gas and bloating for a lot of people."
No, son, thank you very much. No, it gives me the wind, something terrible.
So what's the point in eating a healthy bowl of oats if it makes you feel unwell once you've finished? Undercooked oats will also be chewy, which is not the texture most people have in mind when they think about a tasty bowl of oatmeal. To achieve the perfect level of doneness, cook your oats until all of the liquid has absorbed. If that happens and the oats aren't yet tender, add a little bit more liquid to the pan. Continue this process until the oatmeal reaches the perfect tender consistency you're looking for. Of course, the flip side of undercooked oatmeal would be the alternative. That would be overcooked oatmeal, and that's actually a problem as well.
Big mistake. Big. Huge.
Oatmeal isn't supposed to be a lumpy bowl of porridge where the grains are so soft and mushy that they barely need to be chewed. Instead, it should have an al dente texture, similar to pasta. To do this, Mackenzie Ryan, a food writer and photographer for Food Above Gold, says to cook according to the package instructions and use only 3/4 of the water amount recommended. Even with less water, the oatmeal will still release the starch that allows for the smooth, almost saucy base, while maintaining the correct texture of the grain. And there is a fix if you are concerned you have gone too far with your bowl of oatmeal. If you think you've overcooked your dish, try removing it from the heat and then add a bit of water or milk. Next, stir it. Doing that should add some moisture back in and give it a more appealing consistency. You can also add some nuts or seeds to a bowl of overcooked oatmeal to help add a little texture back into the dish. With some practice, you'll find the ratio of creaminess and graininess that works best for you.
You're so busy doing unto others, it's time you did unto yourself. Now, here's a bowl of Quaker Honey Nut Oatmeal.
Much like beans, oats will taste better with some soaking the night before. Oats contain phytic acid, a substance that makes it harder for your body to absorb minerals like iron, zinc, and calcium. So, by eating the oatmeal, you simply won't get all the nutrients you desire. Thankfully, soaking the oats will help break down those acids, making the oats way easier to digest. Soaking oats is also great because it helps the starches break down, so it's almost like cooking but in a low and slow way. Ultimately, there'll be a better bowl of oatmeal as a result when you soak your oats overnight, and you'll be glad you put that effort in after, especially when you're able to have your oatmeal breakfast ready with little to no effort in the morning. Just pull it out of the fridge, heat it in the microwave, and add any toppings you want. Unless, of course, you enjoy your oatmeal plain. Breakfast is served.
Instant Quaker oatmeal is part of the balanced breakfast.
Oatmeal on its own can be bland, but adding a few simple ingredients can elevate it to a whole new level. Rachel Lessenden, recipe developer and founder of Health My Lifestyle, had this to say about adding flavor to your oatmeal. Try adding a dash or two of cinnamon, stir in some applesauce for some natural sweetness, or use maple syrup or brown sugar. Other ways to add flavor? Add some texture and crunch with nuts and seeds. Swirl in some peanut butter and add a little vanilla extract. It's all about the flavors and textures you enjoy, because those are going to be what creates a better bowl of oatmeal.
Apples and cinnamon! Snifferific!
Chefs will always advise adding layers of flavor as you go with any dish, from the beginning to the middle to the grand finale. This is very important to add layers of taste and complexity to whatever you're cooking. To get the best flavors in your oatmeal breakfast, the same holds true. Add your spices and add-ins while it's cooking. This will give your breakfast the deepest flavor and soften up any add-ins you choose to include. To make things easier, keep frozen fruit on hand and add some in while your oats are cooking. They'll soften while the oatmeal cooks and infuse the entire oatmeal dish with the flavor of their juices. It'll result in a seriously delicious bowl of oatmeal that doesn't even need sugar for sweetness.
That sounds good.
One of the biggest mistakes you can make when making your oatmeal is using a heat that is way too high. Cooking at too high of heat will cause the oatmeal to burn and stick to the bottom of the pot. That's not good for your oatmeal or the pot that it's being cooked in. Home cook and food expert Gwen Laurent added, "The key to a successful bowl of oatmeal is to cook it over medium-low heat for the amount of time specified in the recipe you are following. You want the oatmeal to bubble a bit, so heat is important, but going too far will be bad. So keep an eye on that flame. If you don't, you'll spend a good portion of your morning trying to remove that burnt oatmeal from the bottom of your pan." Salt is perhaps the most important seasoning of them all. It's not good to overdo it, but underdoing it can unravel a dish quickly. Don't forget to add just a quick pinch of salt to the water before you add the oatmeal to the pot. Gwen Laurent had this to say about adding salt to your oatmeal. "It may seem counterintuitive if you're preparing a sweet bowl of oats, but doing this will enhance the flavor of your breakfast. Adding that also-important pinch of salt at the beginning of the cooking process will be a good way to achieve that perfect nutty and toasty porridge-like oatmeal that we all crave. We don't taste the salt, but we'll sure miss it if it's not there. Adding the salt at the end won't achieve that same flavor, so be sure to make it an early step." Stirring is an essential part of many cooking processes, and that includes those oats. You need to stir the oatmeal while it's cooking in the pot so it doesn't burn. But that's not the only reason. The act of stirring ensures a consistent texture and taste, and will help prevent all those lumps and uneven cooking. The perfect oatmeal is creamy in texture, and consistent stirring does a lot along the way to help this to happen. But don't over-stir your oatmeal either. You want the oats to still have a bit of a bite to them and still maintain a rustic texture with just the right creaminess. Stirring your oats too much causes them to produce too much starch, which can lead to gummy oatmeal. It's very important to use the right ratio of liquid to oats when making oatmeal. Not enough liquid will, of course, make them dry and clumpy. Too much liquid, on the other hand, may turn them into mush or worse, soup. If you're using quick oats or rolled oats, Eating Well says you'll need 1 cup of liquid for every half cup of oats. If you're using steel-cut oats, you'll need even more liquid, 1 cup for every quarter cup of oats. Palak Patel, chef at the Institute of Culinary Education, added, "Make sure to start with water or soak them overnight. Add any liquid after the cooking is completed for a creamy texture. If your oatmeal appears runny, you can always cook it a bit longer to soak up that extra liquid, but a dry oatmeal is a sad alternative."
So, I'm addicted to eat oatmeal without water.
Whether you use milk or water, it's important to pay attention to order and consistency. No one wants mushy and watery oatmeal for breakfast. Chef Chris Valdez, a former Food Network star finalist, says if you're cooking your oats, milk shouldn't be the liquid you grab first. Valdez went on to say, "One of the most common mistakes that I see people make when making oatmeal is that they use milk as their primary ingredient, and then they wonder why they end up with a mushy oatmeal rather than a creamy oatmeal." Experts over at Kitchen agree, saying using milk when cooking oatmeal creates sticky and gluey oatmeal. To achieve creamy oatmeal, Valdez recommends you start by using water as your main liquid first, sprinkle in some salt, and once the water comes to a boil, add in your oats and bring down the heat and allow it to slowly cook. Right before serving, add a splash of your desired milk, be it plant-based or dairy milk, and then top your oatmeal with your favorite ingredients and serve.